friends, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and well, it's been exactly 87 days since the Demons were bundled out of the 2023 final series in straight sets for the second year in a row. And it's exactly 87 days until the Demons' 2024 campaign begins. How's that for symmetry? Tonight, we'll wrap up the disastrous end to our 2023 season. We'll discuss our trade and draft haul. We'll dissect our 2024 fixture and also analyse the disappointing end to our women's campaign to go back-to-back. Joining me tonight to discuss all of this is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben Man. Good evening to all our listeners. I didn't realise it was 87 days gone and 87 days to go. That's quite amazing. But first of all, I'd like to thank all those listeners who sent in photos of what your three presenters might look like in real life. I love that thread. We're correct, of course. We are prime examples of fine roosters. And if you believe that, you'll believe anything else we're going to say tonight on the podcast.
Just in regards to that 87 days since and 87 days until, that was an absolute fluke. I put in how many days since, and I can't remember what date the final that we were bundled out was, but I put that in, 87 days, and I thought, well, how many days is it now until the season opener? Round zero. Just turned out that it was 87 days. It was an absolute fluke. I couldn't believe it. Nearly fell out of my chair. So that is really good symmetry going on there. Hopefully we can parlay that into some type of luck and win another flag. But also joining us tonight to give us some hope that a Demon dynasty in our lifetime is still achievable is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. I had no hope until then. And I mean, that's an extraordinary bit of luck and numbers. So I think that bodes well for 24 season, that's for sure. Especially with around nil or round zero being starting our season next year.
Well, before we get into everything, I'm going to go into our reviews each and every week. I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. We love the feedback. We always do read them out on the show, and the 5 stars really do help boost the podcast. It, in turn, gets more listeners to the show, and that in turn brings more people to Demonland, and therefore more contributions and more voices to the website and to this show for our audience, from our audience. So the best present you can give Demonland this holiday season is by boosting us in the form of these reviews and helping to spread the word about Demonland to Demon family and friends. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀 says, I guess that's why they call it the Blues. So as Jack Dyer used to say on 3KZ all those years ago, bad kicking is bad football and our kicking is atrocious. I would have played Grundy in both games and questioned what really happened to Pickett this year. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀, which completely wiped out my weekend. May was superb, but I question our toughness once again. Only 𝗦cie had to go at the thug. No one else reminded me of the Grand Final 2000, where only Schwartz threw the flag while Essendon bashed us. Your comments about 1987 preliminary final are spot on, and I still vividly remember my anger and non-stop cussing as I walked from the ground. Thanks again, gentlemen, for your obvious fine, hard work and the way you all add value in a mostly positive way. Just like you guys, I'll be back. Go D's. Well, thank you, 𝗟𝗏, with a bit of commentary on our last finals game. We won't talk too much about that. Romy Lip says, soothing balm for traumatised souls. A must listen for any and all Demon tragics and probably for much of the footy media too. Insightful, authentic and intelligent commentary on our beloved club. You call it as it is and give voice to the most broken fans among us. Thank you, Andy, B-Man and George. Well, thanks, Romy. Another broken, traumatized kindred demon soul. I feel your pain. Thanks for listening. 𝗏𝗏𝘀𝗁𝗀 says, my Demons Bible, easily the most detailed and honest insight into all things Demons, referencing all the up-to-date stats that matter and canvassing extensive player and team issues across AFL, VFL and AFLW. It has everything you need to scratch that Demon itch and then some. Thank you, 𝗏𝗏𝘀𝗁𝗀. Great, concise review. It's much appreciated, and thank you for listening. In fact, thank you to all of our listeners who answered my call this year and spent the time to leave us a 5-star review and write a comment. We really do appreciate it. The season might be over, but keep the feedback coming. Please give us a 5-star on Apple Podcasts, and please don't forget to click that write a review link and write that review, as well as clicking the 5 stars, and we'll read it out on the show next year. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Threads. Just search for Demonland. Give us a follow. And in addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all your preferred podcasting app, the Demonland podcast is available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for Demonland podcast to find our channel. If you want to chat with other Demon fans, you've never been to our forum, head on over to demonland.com, sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post questions or comments for the show like we've got tonight, there are also multiple topics and threads with various discussions of all things demons. So join up to join in on the conversation. It's far superior to anything you'll read on any social media platform. And I mentioned in the last few podcasts that the trade and draft period were the best times to be on Demonland, but the preseason training period probably trumps that. It's a time of the season that we're all full of hope. Everyone's flying on the track. We're all training the house down, and Demonland's track watchers are out in force once again. So be sure to check in to get the latest from the track, straight from our respected track watchers. And if you'd like to join us on the air tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to talk about, then please give us a call. 03 9016 3666. That's 03 9016 3666. I'll answer. I'll put you on mute, bring you on when I can, when there is a break in the conversation. If you're listening live, join us in the chat room by simply heading on over to demonland.com/podcast. We'll try to be attentive to the comments and questions posted there. I'll rely on my co-hosts, keep an eye on it for any comments or questions we receive. And this is our season finale tonight, season 7 of the Demonland podcast. We started in 2017. We will, however, be back sometime in February to do our annual season preview show, where we give our famous predictions for the season, and hopefully we do a better job next year than we did this year. So, and just on that topic, let's revisit some of the predictions that each of us made at the start of the season. At the beginning of the year, my esteemed colleagues and I gave our predictions for which teams would rise and which teams would fall. 2 of us were on the money, and one of us failed spectacularly when it came to the teams that would rise. I correctly predicted that Carlton would rise, and for a period that prediction was looking very shaky, but the Blues finished the season strongly, ultimately knocking the Demons out of the finals and just falling at the last hurdle before the grand final. So a preliminary final berth for the Blues is a big, for my prediction, for which team would rise in 2023. Now, I listened back to the mid-season podcast, review podcast that was recorded in late June. And due to the Blues' record at the time of that recording, I had adjudicated that prediction was a massive fail for me. But I just wanted to get it on record that I was actually spot on in the end with that prediction. But lest anyone think that I'm a genius, I did fail spectacularly on my prediction of which team would fall, but more on that shortly. George, as noted during the season preview at the start of the year, you actually failed in the brief for choosing a team that would rise. You picked Brisbane, who finished 2022 in 6th place, but did end up making the preliminary final that year. So choosing them as a team to rise in 2023 wasn't really within the spirit of predicting a team to rise. We're really looking for a team outside the 8, but they did go 1 week further this season. So I guess we'll just give you one ding for that prediction. So, and I'm just saying it wasn't really a stretch to pick them. So better have a think about it for next season, who you're going to pick. Bin Man, on the other hand, predicted the Western Bulldogs as his team to rise. And if you recall, in 2022, they just snuck into 8th spot in the last round of that season. They were then bundled out of the first week of finals. This season, they failed to make the finals, finishing in 9th place. So Bin Man, that's a big for you. Yes.
Indeed.
So in a spectacular fall from grace from my big win in predicting the Blues as the team to rise in 2023, I predicted that the 2023 Premiers Collingwood would be the team to fall this season. I don't even have words to defend my prediction. I got it very, very wrong, and I don't think I'm ever going to recover. Bin Man, you too predicted that the Magpies would fall, so you all...
But also say, Andy, that I also said that several times, I think, that they were the most overrated
You,
team.
you did. So wait,
And I still maintain it. I still maintain that's true. And I'm already predicting that I'm going to say that they're going to be the biggest fall next year.
All right,
like
well,
historical fall.
you know what? I would love to be the most overrated team and take home a premiership. So we'll just say that.
Yeah.
You also predicted that the Swans would fall, which they did, from a grand final to 8th after the home and away season. They would have fallen even further if not for another goal line adjudication failure against the Crows. So you missed the Pies but got the Swans, but you were only meant to pick one team to fall, so they cancel each other. So I'm just going to give you a for that.
Yeah,
So
and I was actually talking about the Collingwood women's team.
George, you predicted that the Tigers would fall in 2023. That's a big... they fell from 7th in 2022 to 13th this year. So our wonderful predictions, for better or worse, will return in our 2024 season preview show in the new year. So we can put those predictions away. I think we're probably going at about 50%. So don't listen to anything that we have to say for the rest of this show. Let's get
whatever you do, don't put money on it.
Yeah, you definitely don't put money on it. Gamble responsibly.
And just before we roll into the questions, just how are you guys going with the loss? Where you're sitting at it with on 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃's 5 stages of grief?
By now I'm over it. Really? Obviously not. Obviously
I'm not anywhere
happy.
near the suburb of acceptance.
Yeah, I know, but what can we do? There's nothing we can do about it. So I am at the acceptance phase.
Between denial and anger and bargaining and. So
George,
it won't be acceptance for me until I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I think it won't be acceptance until we win a final next year, but maybe once the season starts proper, maybe I'll put it behind me. But I'm not convinced. So acceptance seems a long way away at this point.
Oh, I will say I am angry still. So, George, how about you?
I think I'm at acceptance, but I prefer to be in denial, especially with Collingwood winning it.
Well, that I don't. Have we had a show since the grand final? No, we haven't.
No,
we haven't. But
what a day!
I must say that I ignored almost on any social media platform I was on. As soon as I saw that black and white Guernsey, it was flick just past it. I put it out as soon as the siren rang. I turned the TV off. I didn't want to hear the song. I refused to watch Maynard accept a premiership medallion. Cox, quite a few of them. It made me feel sick.
It's funny you mentioned being angry because I still I sort of go up and down. I'm still furious about the Collingwood game. Like that was such a impactful game to be at, and it's like I think I was traumatized by the whole experience. It was the worst experience I've ever had at the footy. Still, I've calmed out. It's a bit of time's gone since then, but it still feels that way. And we'll talk about it. What went wrong? I guess there's a question about that.
It's about to come up now. Yeah,
we only played 3/4 of footy. We were, that was just. It was such an awful incident, and then how that played out for the rest of the finals with, him, dancing around and carrying on in the grand final, and just. Really, I'm still furious about it, and it's really interesting. There's a thing about Tuck today, and I was thinking about it. The AFL just got to get serious. It's just pathetic the way that they ran that case. If they're serious about head injuries, and it still just absolutely burns my bacon.
I think all the Melbourne supporters, at least, will in years to come look back at this year as one that got away. For whatever reason, but it was definitely one that got away. We had the skills and the capabilities, and there were things didn't go right, and things seemed against us in a big way, particularly after that Maynard incident. But we should have been the ones holding up the cup this year.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, of course, it sounds stupid to say that Collingwood are overrated, but I still think that of course. I think we're a better football team than them. I honestly believe that. They won the flag. That's what sport's about. In the interim, in this period of time, I've been. It was real. Thanks, Andy, very much for inviting George and I as your +2 for the best and fairest. That was terrific. And one of the highlights for me was having all of the ex-players coming up, and I think they were getting correct me, what they were getting an award for having played in a grand life membership for having played in a grand final. Is that right?
Yeah, I think anyone who either won a grand final or played in a grand final, I can't remember what.
Yeah, maybe one. And having that many sort of older players, maybe there was 20 players ex-players up on the stage, and some players who played in the 60s. So getting on a bit now with some younger players as well, obviously. And anyone who played in the 21 team, it became a life member, which I think is a fantastic, it's a fantastic thing for the club to have done. But it really reinforced or it brought home this idea of the club, Melbourne Footy Club. It's been around for 150 years, and the sort of time goes past, and we're obviously super emotionally invested in the club. And in the interim, I've watched both seasons of Welcome to Wrexham, and I just finished watching the whatever it is called, Sunderland Till I Die, and both of which had the same sort of echoes of really old football clubs with people who are really, really committed, and as I totally agree with George. I think to the day I die, I think about this season, the season just gone, as one that got away. But it's all part of the tapestry of supporting, a footy club that you love, isn't it?
When you talk about those shows like that, Sunderland Till I Die and Wrexham, I really regret. Well, I don't regret because I had nothing to do with it, but that the club didn't do. And I don't know. You never know when you're going to win a flag, and there was COVID that year and all that. So, but I would have loved someone. It would have been great if someone had a camera throughout that whole year and was recording interviews and following the team as they went. And I mean, hindsight's beautiful, 2020 hindsight. But how fantastic would some documentary following that year would have been fantastic.
It'd be great if the Melbourne Footy Club had a camera that could record.
Well, they do. They're doing, stuff all the time.
Yeah, I did see a couple of minutes of training footage on the website, which was good.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the next the first question that we've got, and it's basically what went wrong. So Bigfoot says, great to have you fellas back. It's been a long few months and the season didn't pan out the way we all hoped. Looking back at another disastrous straight sets finals exit, what do you think ultimately went wrong for us? Not so sure we can blame it on injuries like 2022. For me, it was our poor delivery into our forward line and poor execution in front of the big sticks. If we don't fix these two things in 2024, we will not be making another preliminary final, let alone a grand final or a flag. So Bigfoot, I completely agree. I don't think we were that far off any of the teams above us. 100% on the money. Poor delivery into our forward line, poor execution in front of goals, probably cost us a preliminary finals berth. I'm not convinced that we would have beaten Brisbane at the Gabba in the preliminary final, but I guess we'll never know that. And if we had not had that slow start, as you were talking about, only playing 3 quarters against Collingwood, the Gus incident in that thing, had we kicked straighter, we might have been playing in the prelim at the G, and then who knows. But for mine, it was poor forward line connection, poor kicking for goals that ultimately let us down. So, George, followed by B-Man, what went wrong for you?
There's never any one thing, I think, when you're analysing these sort of things. It's too easy to forget that we lost both games by 9 points that we played in, a lousy 9 points. Collingwood won a premiership by winning 2 games with a total of 12 points. That's the difference between getting there and not. They were on the right side of it. We weren't. That's the way the cookie crumbles. But the other thing I think that really affected us was less about the delivery into the forward line. The fact is we didn't have a forward line to be able to play the way that we wanted to play, the way that we trained. If you remember during the year at any one point, and probably towards the end more importantly, we didn't have Fritsch. Melcham got injured. Petty was injured. T-Mac was injured. Ben Brown was injured. It was all left up to one bloke in the end. We had a forward line of one. At the end of the day, in order to win matches, you've got to kick goals, and we didn't really have anyone to go to in the forward line when the opportunities were there, and we still only fell down by a total of 9 points in those 2 finals games. So we're not very far from it. I think we'll be serious contenders again next year for that very simple reason. You can't do anything about injuries. You can't do anything about bad luck. I wish we could do something about people like Maynard, but we'll have to wait till for the AFL to do that, but I'm not holding my breath. So, we're still close. We will be close, and we can hope that the footy gods don't shine so favourably for Collingwood next year.
B-Man.
Where were we? So what was the question? What went wrong?
What went wrong in your eyes in terms of the 2023 season?
George said, I mean, there wasn't just one thing. I mean, last year when we were having this same conversation, it was much more obvious. So that's, you could. I remember I used the analogy of, drop a sand in one of those sorts of scales, and you keep dropping a thing of sand, and eventually the scales tip the wrong way. And last season, that in hindsight, at this stage when we were talking about it in hindsight last year, the scales, there was just too much against us. I don't think that was the case this year. There was lots against us in the end, as George was noting, and particularly I think losing Melksham so late in the season. It's remarkable actually how important he became as a player to our setup, not just because of the role he's playing, but because of his ability to finish under pressure. I mean, go back to that clutch goal that he kicked, near the end of the game earlier against Carlton. Yeah. So, I mean, we just needed someone like that in the finals. I think, that was critical. So I think losing JVR, I sort of, at the time, because I thought he was near the end of his, run in terms of he's looking a bit, a bit sort of tired. I wasn't thinking in my mind coming to the Blues game that it would be such a major issue, but it was, I think, because it was another structural problem. That was, a big out, plus a competitor, plus someone who's got good kicking technique. You really expect him to have kicked a couple of goals or a goal or so, at least in that game against the Blues. What went wrong? I mean, funny watching these shows, the Welcome to Wrexham and Sunderland Until I Die, is that, luck plays such a massive role in any successful season and any unsuccessful season. And we had our share of bad luck. I'm wiping the Collingwood game off. I think that was, basically we almost beat Collingwood despite the fact that we only played 3 quarters. We almost rolled them. As George says, it's a really good point, George, about the, how close all the finals were. If you compare it to 21 and 22, Geelong steamrolled through the finals last year, were clearly miles better than anyone else, in terms of where they were at. They were fit, they were strong. Melbourne, of course, in 21 steamrolled, all opposition through the finals. Collingwood did not do that, so it was very close between the teams. For me, if I was to pick one thing that went wrong, is something that hasn't happened for a while, I don't think, is the last, how long you want to talk about, the last 2.5 minutes of the Blues game was about the first time I can recall for a while. There was clearly, I think, that some players tightened up. There were some errors of judgment in that last 2 minutes. They'd love to have their time back again. 𝗍anie not clearing and, kicking it straight to Wiedering, McVie electing to try and spoil rather than, stopping, who was it? Not Henderson. Allowing him to play on and setting up that last goal. There was, 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗁 inexplicably not going inboard to track in the last minute. It just felt to me that the players tightened, and it was like the idea suddenly, the notion of the fact that we could go out in straight sets loomed large, maybe even that last 10 minutes of the last quarter. And again, of course, accuracy is, we kicked 7-11 against the Pies. And I forget what the scoring was in the, how many points we scored against the Blues. Nonetheless, we missed too many chances. And partly I think there was a pressure thing. I mean, 𝗍cie, I saw it the other day. 𝗍cie, I don't know, we talked about it in the wrap-up, 𝗍cie electing to tap that ball back in, or, even trying to spoil it off Oliver, 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗁 hitting the post. But I think 𝗍cie really, that miss where he hit the post and elected, that was a brain thing. It felt like a pressure thing rather than, he didn't go through a process that looked smooth. So his miss at the end of the third quarter, after finally getting a free kick, and that miss where he hit the post in the last quarter were critical mistakes, I think. And, it felt like that they didn't handle the pressure in the last 2 minutes as well as they would have wanted to. And look, let's be honest. I think if you were asked 𝗟𝗀𝗀, he would say in a private moment, and so would every single player, that it was, a fail, wasn't it? Like that, exactly as George said, there was a grand final on the table, for whatever, for a range of reasons, not like 22, where there were some really strong mitigating factors. I think we were good enough to win it, and it will always be one, as George said, that we left on the table. And I'm sure that's the way the club, I'm positive the way Good would see it as a fail. I mean, fail is probably not, not the right word, perhaps, but it wasn't what they wanted, and there was definitely a chance to win a flag, and we go again next year.
9 goals, 17 to 11 goals, 7. That was so
All
we
right.
kicked 2 goals, 6 in the last to 3 goals, 2 after half time. It was 5 goals, 10 for us to 6 goals, 4 to them. So,
and
kicking.
at least three of them were inside 20 metres. Well, at least two were, because 2 of them were 𝗪cie.
Yeah.
And then there was another that, from memory, where was it Sparrow, or I can't recall.
I've wiped
there were
most
at least 2 or 3, at least 2 inside 20 metres.
All right, next one. Buck Naked says, I think we are still top 4 material. Hopefully not going to waste the double chance again. Scroll adds, thanks for all your efforts this season, boys. I only found this podcast midway through the year, but it became a staple for me each and every week. I'm a little bit concerned about our straight sets exits over the past 2 seasons, and I'm a little bit worried if we are still genuine contenders for the flag, and I just hope we don't drop away from the pack. Are we still in the premiership window, and are we in any danger of dropping out of finals contention in 2024? I can see B-Man sort of shaking his head already. B-Man, would the premiership window still open, or is it shut? You're on mute.
Just waving my hands because of this stupid mic. So how's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, so absolutely we are. 100% we are. And, I think that's clearly, Goodwin said this when he came in. He is about building a team that is in the premiership window for 6, 7, 8, 9 years. That's what he's all about. It's what he said in his first season, when he came, his first season as senior coach. It's the Geelong model. It's also the Richmond model. Richmond, obviously, they won 3 in a row, but they were successful around that, weren't they? They were successful afterwards, and, they managed to get their 3 wins, obviously, their 3 flags, but they, hard work was in place for a long time before that, building that team. It wasn't as if it came out of nowhere. And I think that's it's interesting looking at other sporting competitions around the world. That's the model, it's a bit harder in, say, the NFL, but, is to have a team that can compete at the highest level and is I think their probably goal would be every year they're a top 4 chance. I can't see any reason why we would think that we would not make the 8 next season. I expect us to make top 4, and then we go again. It doesn't mean we win a flag. But we're in the frame for winning flags. You look at our demographic on our list; it is extraordinary. I mean, Geelong pushed that envelope for a long time, but they, it's worth remembering that the 2022 flag that they won was the oldest team that's ever played a game of football collectively that day. So they, I think from memory, they had 6 or 7 players over 30. We've still got another, at least 5 years, 6 years probably out of 𝗦cie, Track, Oliver, Salo, Gus, probably 𝗪cie, given, how robust he's been and how fit he is. We've got obviously 𝗪cie and those players. We've got a great nucleus for a team that can be top 14 for the next 5-6 years. They've built the list brilliantly, and I know we'll talk about that, and Taylor's a big part of that, and so's Lamb, and also, obviously 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀. So 100% yes, we're well and truly in the premiership window, and I think we will be for the next at least 3 to 4 years.
I think Geelong actually, I'm not sure about grand final day, but at some point during the year they had 11 players over 30 playing. So I actually think grand final day might have been more than just 6. So anyway, I don't have the stats to back it up.
So
but
they've
it was
gone,
11.
we've done, if you go back and look at Geelong's drafting, they didn't get a top 10 draft pick for I can't. It'd be 6 or 7 years in a row without a top 10 or even a first rounder for several years in a row. Compare that to us. We've got 2 first round draft picks this season. We had who did we pick up last season? We had draft first rounders last year, and then previously to that we picked up 𝗍𝗲 high, we picked up Jackson high. So I think they've done a brilliant job at in terms of having not having a bubble in the middle of a gap between, say, 25 years old, 30 years old. You look at, compare our list to West Coast. West Coast's list is all over the shop because, they haven't been able to bring quality players through that sort of 23 to 26 range, the 75 to 125 game range. And in that bubble of players, we've got 6 or 7 players who are in that. Plus we've got young players coming up. And one thing that I think Goodwin should be really complimented and lauded for is his preparedness to play young players like McVie, like 𝗍𝗲, bring them in, like 𝗍𝗲, bring them in. Sparrow, it's easy to forget now, Sparrow's 23, but he came in as a young player, that he gives those young players a run. And that's really, great from both a team perspective, but that means that we're going to have 3-4 years, we're going to have another crop of 6 or 7 players in that 70 to 80 range. McVie will be up there. Hopefully the Colt and the Duke will come in and, they will have played 50 games by then. I think they've got the list looking in really good shape to remain competitive for some time.
Geelong had 10 players over 30 on grand final day that day, and Jeremy Cameron was 29. So he was number 11. Anyway, go ahead.
The other side of the coin, good luck to Geelong about that, but the cliff has finally arrived for Geelong, and that while they've got a premiership tucked away there beautifully, good luck to them, fantastic. I don't think they had much competition, fortunately, last year to be able to achieve that, especially given the way the grand final was played. But the cliff has come for Geelong as it's come for Hawthorn and come for Richmond, unfortunately, as well.
Now, Andy, can I just test that? I just changed my mic. How does that sound? Is it?
Yeah. Look, it's not as crystal clear as the old one, but that seems like it's on its last leg, and we might have to before next show next year. We'll have to work that out at a later date, but it's fine for now. Bucknecker also has something else. He asks if we're rating players and then coaches. We're not going to talk about coaches. I would be interested to get your scorecards for them in 2023. Biggest contributors, biggest improvements, biggest letdown. So I'll start. Biggest contributor. For me, Christian Petrarca, our Bluey Truscott winner. His partner in crime, Clayton Oliver, was missing for a big chunk of the season. He was asked to put a couple of different hats on during the season. When, for example, when he needed to go forward, he's just a star. I think he was our biggest contributor in 2023. And B-Man, I noticed that you've also chosen track, so you can take it up from there. B-Man, you're very soft. I don't know if you did something to your mic. You're not on mute, but something you just went. You can't hear anything from you. But B-Man was going to say that he's in love with track and that he wants to get married. But while B-Man, I can't hear anything from you. So, George, you chose JVR. Take it away for that while B-Man sorts out his mic issues.
He's just disappeared under the table for all the people who can't see him. But, hopefully he'll come up again. I put in JVR in here. I think it's too easy to forget what this kid did during the season. He played 20 games for the season, not having previously played a senior game at all. We certainly saw in the previous season the potential there, and that was being exhibited at 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝗁. And again, while we're all calling for him to be played in the senior side last year, the club held off with him, and I think we saw this, or we're starting to see the fruits, or we definitely saw the fruits of having him in there this year. Without JVR this year, we would have been in real strife. Like I just went through the list before of the forwards who weren't available at some time during the season. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗄, Melcham, Petty, T-Mac, Ben Brown. JVR is 20 years of age, and he was playing the full forwards role. Let's not forget, a key position role in his very first game. And then to top it all off, he was expected to, and he did, go into the ruck in multiple games. That's a heavy, heavy load for a 20-year-old. So we can certainly all admire the people like Petrarca and Oliver and Max and the skills that they bring to it. This is a 20-year-old kid, and he was holding down one of the most important positions in the field. So from my perspective, he was a great contributor this year.
Still can't hear you, big man. So I will offer, if you want to call in, to get
I
can hear you.
It's gone through, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that working?
Yeah. If we've got to go through your computer, we'll do it that way.
We'll go through the computer. All right.
I can hear you loud and clear.
No more going down to Aldi to get your microphones.
Yeah, I might have to buy you a microphone and send it to you. So,
well, it's a bloody good one. I think the fact I just dropped it might have had something to do with it. But on track is that he was absolutely deserved winner of the 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁, and for all the reasons you said, Andy. But he was enormous, and remember how important it was how we went forward. And that was the other problem about it, George, in the finals, is that we couldn't throw him forward, because it was, he was our Mr. Fix-It. I wish he could kick a bit better with his shooting, but, he was enormous. And I was reflecting on this after the Bluey, is it also would have been a really tough year for him because he was and is really close with 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗏. 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝗏 obviously did it really tough. I know Track is a really sort of sensitive bloke, and he would have felt that hard that whole season. He would have felt Gus hard, that situation with Gus. So, and his ability to sort of continue to show leadership, turn up every week, get the numbers he was getting right through the season, and how robust he is as well, how well he trains. And, I thought he's was brilliant this year, ultimate professional and deserved winner of the Bluey. Interesting, George, on JVR, because he was my big improver. All of what you just said is 100% right, but he is a fellow who was playing VFL the season before, and he said himself he wasn't ready. He wasn't ready for VFL level, AFL level, I should say. We're all keen for him to come into the side, or some were keen for him to come into the 22 side late in the season, and going sort of touching a bit on what I was saying before about the way Goodwin thinks about development, is that he wasn't prepared to risk JVR's development for the off chance that he might be the difference in, winning a flag. He thinks big picture, Goody. And it'll be interesting when we talk about Grundy later, because I reckon that's in a similar vein, to be perfectly honest. But I thought, to go from VFL level and, rucking a bit, and he was good at VFL level, absolutely deserve it. But to play to the level that George was just saying is, that's such a huge improvement. And I had a look at some numbers. He compares super well, for instance, to Jonathan Brown, who was, similar player. The big players take a long time to get going. And I think, for young Jefferson, JVR's set a pretty sort of fair benchmark, I reckon, because it's one of the truisms of footy that, you think back to Hawkins, how long it took Hawkins I had a look at his numbers and, comparing him to JVR. It took him 3 full seasons of footy to average more than a goal a game, Hawkins, 3-4 seasons. And, he wasn't, it took him 4 or 5 seasons to become sort of anywhere close to the force that he has been since then. JVR's got so much upside. He's massive for us going forward. And it's so easy to underrate him, I reckon.
Yeah, it's really everyone says that the key position players, they take a lot longer to develop. When I was my interview with Jason Taylor, he reiterated that in terms of the key position players. They take a couple of years to get through, and this is only his second season in the system. And, you can't sort of expect him to come in and kick 3 or 4 goals a game. So the best is yet to come with him, I'm sure.
And it looks like that. Remember in 22, they did quite a lot of ruck. He did quite a lot of rucking at 𝗪cie.
Yeah.
Again, it's sort of a good example of the way Goody holistically looks at the team and development, because I suspect he's going to become an important player next year at playing essentially as the second ruck.
I'll ask you this now. I know we're going to talk about we've brought in Fullerton, and we'll talk about him soon. But I guess for this discussion of JVR is going to have to do all the backup. You would think he's going to be the number 2 ruckman, unless we are going to play Fullerton.
Well, even if Fullerton does come in, you still need a player who can, what I really like about JVR's ruck work is his tap work is really clever, and that's, he's still going to have minutes on the ball even with Fullerton in the team, you'd think, just because that's a really good skill. But it's worth remembering that he developed that skill at 𝗪cie, and they flogged him for a year playing him in the ruck, and he didn't look a natural ruck at the beginning of that. When I first saw him rucking, he was only a kid. So, his improvement was fantastic, I thought.
And I'll ask you, George, I know you don't like us having to rob Peter to pay Paul, and that seems to be what we were doing with JVR. As we had to, we weren't playing Grundy. It was just Max rucking solo. He can't ruck all day. So therefore JVR was the guy that had to go into the ruck. Do you think that's going to hinder him in some way, or run him into the ground?
I think unfortunately it'll hinder the team more than the individual. It'll be interesting to see during the course of the summer. We need all our track watchers to keep an eye on this. We've got Fullerton in, who supposedly has been brought in as a ruck, except that if you look at his highlight reels, there is no rucking shown.
Forward,
I
again,
think that's one of the stories that
you don't see in those highlight videos. You never really see the ruck work.
No.
I want one of those highlight videos for my career.
I have never seen a bad highlights reel for any player who's ever played AFL ever. So, but anyhow, Fullerton's a possibility. The other, it'll be interesting on the track. I wouldn't be surprised if T-Mac is back and running. He might be used as the second grunt ruckman as well. The initial signs are that he's been playing with the backs, but we'll wait and see. I hope he doesn't, because we all know how good a kick he is in the back line or not. So it'll be interesting, but I prefer that JVR sticks to the knitting, so to speak. He's a full forward. He's a brilliant full forward. I don't want him being smashed around in the ruck, even for a couple of minutes a game. We need a target up forward. Ben Brown looks like he'll be back.
But Nick too. I saw some footage today.
Yeah, surprisingly, he looked in good nick at this time last year too. So
he's good at Nick. He doesn't look as athletic, but
yeah. But it'll be interesting come March 7th or whatever. Where people actually finish up on the field. But whatever it is, we can't expect Max to be playing the full game in the ruck role. It's too hard for too long, for 25 games in a season. It's just impossible. Somebody will break. If you do that without a proper relief, he will break, like he did this year. We were very fortunate in having Grundy for a while there, but I think we need to protect Max for what he provides to the team.
I think that's a good point, George. And I reckon in the wash up of the season in their review, Maxi was tiring at the end of the year, and so was JVR. Both of the players that ran through the ruck, and I mean, it's a bit of a hobby horse of mine, but I really hope that the club go to the AFL, and so you've got to look after Maxi better. For he gets smashed from pillar to post, and that continued in both finals, didn't it? In the last 3 games before the finals as well, he was getting smashed. You're right, George. I mean, I think the one thing about Grundy was that period of time is it provided a chop out for him, and so I agree. I have no sense of Fullerton. Is he a good kick? That's fine.
God.
Rachel?
All I can go on is the highlights, and they only ever show good kicks. So.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
he's a good kick then. So.
Yeah, I think the important thing with Fullerton is we decide whether he's spelt with an E or an A in
It's an
the
A.
middle of his name. It's an A. Yeah. Everybody seems on Demonland at least seems to manage to put an E in there.
I'm just going to call him Fullers.
Yeah, that'll do.
So my big improver, it has to be Trent Rivers. He took his game to another level in 2023. His run and carry out of defence, his ability to contest. It's a strong mark. He's got that booming kick. I really love him. He took a massive step up in 2023. And I'd like, we saw him get a bit more midfield time. He had some increased midfield time in 2023, but I'd really like to see a bit more of that as we go into 2024. Really a lot to like about him, a lot of upside to him. And all reports flying on the track.
He did. You're right. That was good. If you hadn't have taken it, I might have thought about him for most improved, because it was a big jump up from the previous season, wasn't it, in terms of the level he was playing at, and also in terms of his importance to our setup and structure, and I guess also our chances of success. He had a great last third of the season. Quiet in the semi though. Yeah, I thought.
I think the big improvement from Rivers was the different game style of territory. Rivers coming out of the back line delivers the ball really deeply, which is critical to the way the team was playing. He's the perfect person for that. So completely different style from last year, where we were depending on the skill of people like Salem to deliver the ball to the wings. Rivers was able to deliver it, 3/4 of the way up the ground, which is the way winning football's played these days.
Exactly, and also, he looked quicker than he did the previous season. So if he gets an outlet handball, or he was running 15 metres before releasing it and kicking at 60. So he was getting huge. Every time he got the footy, good metres gained. Yep. And as you say, it's all about territory now. There's a question about game plan later, and I think that sort of speaks to exactly right, George. It's become a territory game.
All
Again,
right.
It was in the 50s and 60s.
George, you had young 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃.
Young 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃, yeah. Look, in all honesty, at the end of last season, after watching 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 at Casey, I thought he was going to be delisted. He was a long way from being selected from an AFL side, but apparently went away, got himself super fit, came back into the side and played 25 games in his first AFL season. Just an amazing jump up, and a real credit to himself, and a real message to the other young kids in the system, even the ones that have been drafted this year. You've got to put the work in, and when you put the work in, this is how you finish up. And the other amazing thing about McVie is that he held his position in the side. There was never any question about him being dropped out from day one. But his ability to read the game, again, from someone who's so young, was exemplary, and his delivery out of the back line is first class. You certainly prefer a 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 with the ball in hand than, say, a T-Mac from what we knew from years ago. Yeah. So big improver, absolutely the big improver in the side from me, and questions that we would have had about who we're going to put in the back line as from the previous year when we had so many injuries across the board. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 certainly filled that role, and he's staying there for a long, long time by the looks of it.
Yeah, definitely you stole my thunder with him, George, because incredible. He was borderline player, wasn't he, in terms of, the talk was Howes and Disco, they're the ones up next, or even 𝗟𝗟 seemed to be ahead of him, So credit to the work he did over summer and, getting fit. But the other thing I really loved about the role that he ended up playing, George, was that in some respects he became the answer to who is our Neville Jetta, who's going to take that medium sort of size player. He took Cameron, didn't he? I think from memory.
Yes.
He also took Dustin Martin, didn't he? No, was that Hibbo in?
He played some minutes on him. He did play on him.
Yeah, so he was that player, that lockdown, which surprised me a little because he doesn't, he's more of a creative player. But I thought he did some fantastic jobs last season. And, it was a real need for us, that medium size player to play on a medium-sized forward. I mean, it's been an Achilles heel for us since Jets, probably his season in, was it 19, 18?
Yeah.
Since then we haven't really had anyone to play that role to the level that we needed, and particularly with Salem being in and out of the side. So he became a really critical player, didn't he, George?
Yeah, absolutely.
And you might remember he did play on Dusty when Dusty was giving him some on-the-job training. We saw that vision. We're on to biggest letdowns, and you mentioned a player's name while we were just talking a minute ago, and now that I think about it, I probably should have put this guy's name down, and I didn't, and that's Christian Salem. I was quite disappointed. I know he had the thyroid issue early in the year, and then he had the knee, but when he came back, he didn't really set the house on fire like he did in that 2021 season. And 2022, we know he had the injury problem for most of the year, also didn't come back and was never the same guy. So maybe he's my biggest letdown. I don't know. What did you think of Salem's year?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the mitigating factors, because he had the knee, as you said, but another was, speaking of truisms of footy, probably the biggest truism of footy is that if you have an interrupt in preseason, you never ever get to the level that your optimal level in that season. Every player says it. You've got to. They put such a great emphasis on sessions missed. They'll talk about, well, we're in good shape because 95% of our players attended every session. Salo was in good shape, and then he had that thyroid, which completely ruined his preseason. The same for T-Mac. T-Mac, remember, late in 22, they took the risk, understandable risk, putting him in, rushing him back in, but then his foot never got right. He had to have surgery. He never had his preseason right. So that really scuppered his season, but Salo never got back to the level. And I think he's a hugely important player for us next year because, as I've banged on about a lot, I think every team needs 4 or 5 elite kicks. There's not that many good kicks in AFL. So, teams don't have any more than that. And you need 4 or 5 really elite kicks. In 22, and players who can exit from the back half and on transition. In 21, when we won our flag, he was critical because he played a role doing that, but he also took, that down half-back flank role and the general down there, which allowed 𝗟𝗆 to be much more aggressive and play higher up the ground and not, necessarily have to reference his man so closely. And, I think, and so then you had 2 elite kicks coming out of the back half. 𝗟𝗆 had a down year, I think large part because of had to pick when Salo wasn't in the side, and even when Salo came back in, he had to pick up elements of Salem's role that Salo wasn't doing. And I have no doubt as well is because of how critical that transition from the back half is oppositions really targeted Salem as well when he came back into the team, I thought, and 𝗟𝗆. And I thought there was some really good coaching with that. But I agree. I thought he was huge in the fact that he didn't play to the level of 21. And I just really hope that he has a really terrific pre-season and is roaring to go next year because he's a really critical player.
I agree totally, and I don't know how many times I've said it over the years that if a player's for every week after the 1st of January that you're not training, you can take a week off the season, but it's even more critical these days because you never, ever catch up regardless. For the track watchers, I'd already be worrying about whether Oliver's on the track pretty soon for exactly the same reasons as Salo. It's not just enough to get the running into the legs and things like that. You're actually behind everybody else who's done the preseason and still training into the season itself. You're always 2-3 months behind in some cases. So yeah, it was a very good, and particularly for a thyroid thing where he wasn't able to run, he wasn't able to do anything. He'd lost a lot of fitness, a lot of health
A lot of strength.
A lot of everything, absolutely everything. And then you've got to come back to it. And like I said, you're still, in his case, 6 months behind where everybody else is at that point in the season. So not surprising that it happened. For the track watchers, keep an eternal eye about who's not on the track and what happens to them in the coming season.
Absolutely.
Well, Salem is on the track at the moment, but George, did you read one of the track watchers did say that he did have and he wasn't able to do that pre-season block of running that they have to do. Do you recall seeing that? I thought I read that somewhere.
Did see that one.
He's on. I think he's on limited stuff that he's doing now because of that. I don't know. I might have to dig into that at some time while you guys are speaking, just to bring that up.
We'll send the track watchers out.
Yeah.
You make a good point, George, about Oliver, because the other factor, it's not just the touch and the feel or whatever that you miss. It's the now, as we've talked about for the last few seasons and on the podcast, a fair bit about the loading in terms of putting in that, training block where they get, that's what 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 said in the interview last year, is basically it sets up their whole season from a load management perspective, that block in, pre-season, and particularly January and February. He had a knee, he cleaned up his knee surgery, which I didn't even know about. I mean, one of my big disappointments for the club this year has been the comms has been terrible. I didn't even know he had knee surgery. But he's pretty much he's there, he's doing some work, but for a player who relies so much on his fitness, missing a full month and, hopefully he's cherry ripe in January, but it's not a great start to his preseason.
The Salem information I did get sort of a bit backwards, and this is from Danny Z, and Danny Z he's pretty good with his mail in terms of information from the club. Someone asked, does anyone know why Chandler hasn't been training yet, or why Salem is in rehab again? Because Salem apparently was in the rehab group, and he said, this is what Danny Z said, Salem, they're going to progressively load because he had a huge off-season conditioning-wise. They've told him to taper it back.
Right.
So that's.
I thought the real reason was he's so often in the rehab that he just subconsciously that's where he wandered over to.
So I'm not sure if he went too hard in the preseason and they're just telling you back, or he had a huge preseason because of
preseason.
Well, a huge preseason because maybe of last year's thing, and I'm just guessing here. And now they're just sort of tapering him back, or I don't know if he did more than he should have, and they've said, "Hey, you've done too much in your off season. You worked too hard."
Sorry, Andy, I suspect that one of the things he might have been doing is strength, because that was, as George sort of intimated, he lost a lot of his strength. And for a player who does play tight, halfback, strength, one of his, his trump card in some respects is how strong he was, a bit like Jetta in terms of strong for a small fella. He, I guess he's trying to set himself up for a big next season. Let's hope he gets it.
Well, I'll move on to my the actual guy I had, and I was rapt that 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 re-signed with us during the season, and when confronted with the question of biggest letdown of the season, 𝗍𝗁 just sprung to my mind first, and I couldn't exactly pin the exact reason why. He's a small forward, so immediately you're going to look at scoring stats and the year-on-year comparisons. 2021. 40 goals from 68 scoring shots in the 25 games. Then from 2 less games in 2022, he kicked 1 more goal, a total of 41 from 59 scoring shots, which was 9 less than the year before. And then this year, he 37 goals, so 3 or 4 less than those years. But he had 67 scoring shots, which is his best average over the 3 years because he had less games. So for me, I just want more impact from him in terms of hitting the scoreboard and being a genuine, dangerous small forward, which I just don't think he's giving us enough in terms of goal scoring. In terms of being a defensive forward, we know that tackling is his strength, and that metric was certainly up in 2023. 87 tackles in 21, 62 in 22, and 93 in 2023. Marks inside 50 were also up, likewise 1%ers. all of the, I just want more from 𝗍𝗲, and none of the flying for Speckies. I want him to hit the scoreboard more. I think he was a bit inaccurate this year based on that, 37 goals from 67 scoring shots. So, a bit more accuracy from him. Am I being too harsh on 𝗍𝗲?
I think from my perspective, probably there's a bit of recency bias because his last, let's say, third of the season wasn't as strong. No. And I feel a bit like after that incident when he got suspended for
round one.
The Bailey Smith incident, that he took a little while to get back to his aggressive best after that. Yeah. Maybe I'm overthinking that a bit, but you know what I mean? He seemed to struggle a little while afterwards where the line was between, he's playing his best footy when he is really quite aggressive and he's right on that line. And after that, I think he struggled a little bit to sort of find that, balance, I think. And it's also worth remembering that there was quite an extended period of discussion about his future. Where he was going to go. And he's a young fella who, there was a fantastic thing, they're knocking their club's comms, but there was a fantastic sort of video story about his trip home back to South Australia, or, that it was fantastic. But you saw a young guy who is, he's just a young fella.
Yeah.
So I think there are a few things that I don't think you're being unfair necessarily, but I think there are some factors that sort of made for a more difficult season than otherwise might have been.
And I think the other thing is that that long list of tall, big forwards that we had that we didn't have, that makes it very hard for the smalls. Bin Man's going to talk about Spargs as well, but it's not surprising, I think, that the lack of opportunity created by the lack of big forwards to bring the ball to ground means that the smalls suddenly are operating in a desert sometimes. But
I reckon that's such an important point, George, because it goes back again. I mean, really, if you strip away the sort of expectation that, say, I have of how good we are, you take out Brown, let's say Brown and McDonald, everyone agrees they're two of our best four tall forwards, let's say. Any team that you take out two of your best tall forwards, they're going to struggle. And as we've talked about heaps over the last few years, the key role for those players, as you've noted lots of times, George, isn't marking the ball, it's bringing it to ground. Like marking, of course, if they do, great, that's a bonus, but it's all about bringing it to ground for the 𝗍𝗲s to go to work. So,
George, you had Grundy.
Grundy, yeah. I think this was an easy one in a sense for all Melbourne supporters. We had great expectations when he was coming in. The former All-Australian ruckman. It's going to be the backup for Max, and it's going to be indispensable. As it turned out, he was indispensable simply because Max from round 2 got that injury, and if we didn't have Grundy, our whole season, quite frankly, would have been stuffed. He plays a different style of ruck to what Max is. Now, I don't know what happened. Something happened between him and the club during the season, during that period of time. We're obviously never going to find out. We might in a couple of years when people start to retire and find out what was going on. But
he'll write a book, I'm sure. And then
somebody will write a book. Why wasn't Grundy played at certain periods? There was all this talk about him going to 𝗍𝗲 to learn to be a forward. He was never a forward.
Yeah, well, I think that's what happened. I think that's hitting like that. For whatever, or how it was handled or something.
Are we going to have the same problem with Fullerton because he's not a ruck? But sorry about that. And what happened? We could have used Grundy certainly in that final series. Why 𝗍𝗲 was sitting on the bench at all? He shouldn't have even been on the bench regardless, and then wasn't used. There was obviously something going on, either bad blood or either Grundy's refusal to play the roles that he was being expected to play. I don't know what, but all those great expectations that we had at the start of the season came to nothing at the end. I think it'll be very good for him to go to Sydney. He'll be number one man up there, and Sydney play the money ball game very well, and the style of play that Sydney play will suit his rucking style very well. So it was a sad story for us in a way, but at least we got the dollars off the books.
Look, I think it didn't help that we had those Tom McDonald and Ben Brown go down, because if you remember at the preseason game against Richmond, when Grundy kicked 3 and Max kicked 3, they were the third tall, and they weren't.
That was the model.
They weren't playing as a key forward. They were the resting tall ruckman that you had to put on a decent person on, but then you had Ben Brown and Tom McDonald doing their leading and whatever, and then you got Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy each kicking 3 goals. So that didn't pan out because of the injuries. So we could never play that.
Look, I mean, another thing, look, I feel like I'm slamming the club's comms, but the communication around that he's going back to play forward craft was just so not like he's never going to be a forward, as George just said. It was stupid. And then of course, Goody gets asked about it every week for the next 6 or 7 weeks, and it was, I think that was Richo who came out and said that it was just like they just should have said he's going back because we want him to not work on his forward craft. We want him to, clunk some marks and kick some goals. Work on his but yeah, it's interesting. Whenever I thought he was going to play, he didn't, and when I thought he wasn't, he did. So I was pretty nonplussed as well. We didn't get picked against the Pies. I thought, maybe not so much even the Blues when JVR was suspended. A bit like you were saying with 𝗍𝗲, George. Even if he didn't kick any goals or take any marks, he might have brought the ball to ground for 𝗍𝗲 to go to work. But I 100% agree with you. My vibe is something was not right. That's my vibe.
Big man, you got Spargs.
Yeah, and it's funny because, thinking back to that question about what went wrong, I don't know whether you could count these in the what went wrong category, but they're things that I found curious that potentially were factors, and I think not picking Grundy was one of them. And I reckon, I put Spargs as my disappointment because we needed him. It's exactly the sort of player we needed. We needed that the high half forward to sit on the other flank to Nibbler. We needed that player who was able to hit targets coming into 50. I think it's a reasonable criticism people have of Spargs. He just doesn't get enough of the pill, and I think that's fair enough. But I went out, you'll remember, saw the D's play Carlton out at Princess Park, and I was positive that Spargo killed it that day. He was unbelievable that day. And I thought Laurie was average that day, to be honest. And Spargo didn't come into the side. I was amazed. And Laurie did. So, I think it was a disappointing. Spargo would be really disappointed. He had that big block in the middle of the season where he just, couldn't get into the side. I fully expected him to come back in. And, I wonder, my thought is I wonder whether he ever got to the fitness levels that he needed to get to, whether, from the outside you think, well, why the hell did Spargo not get selected ahead of Laurie? But maybe, there's obviously things that fans don't know that they've got internal measurements and metrics on. And I wonder whether one of those things is fitness levels. But just on that, so on the idea of, so what went wrong, there were some things that I've, in hindsight, think were, from Goody's perspective, at the very least, I thought a bit strange. One was not picking Grundy. 2 was, as you mentioned, George, leaving Shaki on the bench for the entire game for in the semi. That that's definitely up there for what's going on there. But I reckon the other one is picking Laurie ahead of Spargo. But then the other really curious one I thought was Laurie came in playing the high half forward role and never really looked like to make it his own, but he played at 𝗍𝗲 pretty much as a mid for the entire season. Yeah. And when Gus went down, as we talked about after the Collingwood game, when Gus went down, I would have thought the obvious thing would have been to bring Laurie onto the ball, but he never spent a minute of time on the ball and only spent, I think from memory, like it was 60% game time or something crazy for 6 or 7 possessions. So I thought that was a really sort of curious decision by Goody as well. So, but yeah, I thought Spargs, certainly he'd be disappointed after barely missing a game for a couple of seasons. And, he probably played 15 games or 14 games last season.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me. Well, let's move on to our strategy and 2023 strategy and improvements for 2024. So Red Jacket says, I'll echo some of the others on here in thanking Andy, B-Man and George for a great season for the podcast. Thanks for giving the listeners the chance to ask questions and contribute to the podcast. The interaction with the audience makes the podcast a really great companion piece to the Demonland website and community. For my question, in the preseason at training and in the practice matches and then into the early season proper, we saw a shift in the way that the Ds moved the ball from defence and into attack. We saw them take more risks in moving the ball through the middle as opposed to around the wings down the line, a strategy that worked well in the premiership year but was perhaps becoming predictable. We also saw our kick-out strategy change a little. Rather than always kicking out to Max on the half-back line, we were first kicking short to 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗍 or 𝗟𝗟𝗋𝗋 and then going long, or every now and again would telegraph that long kick into the guts. As the year wore on, though, we stopped doing any of those new strategies and reverted back to the good old down the line and to a lead into the pocket. 2 questions. Why did we revert back to that strategy, and what changes do you think we need to do in regards to a strategy in 2024 in order to maintain success? Well, these questions are outside of my pay grade, so I'll yield my time to you, Binman.
It's a really fascinating question because that's right. We were looking at moving the ball differently in those. Remember, what did we score against North? It was 120 plus, wasn't it? Or, we were utilising that strategy, and in many ways that was a response to, even though the Pies didn't win the flag the previous year, in many ways that was a response to the way the Pies were moving the ball from the back half and their ball movement patterns. But the thing that I found fascinating about last season, and even on hindsight, is the whole league ended up playing the one style of game. Brisbane, Collingwood, Melbourne, we all played exactly the same. Forget this thing about the Pies and their method. Their method ended up becoming exactly the same as our method. The Blues, Brisbane, Pies and the Demons, and to a lesser extent Adelaide, they were faster, but Adelaide I'd put in that same mix, and definitely the Giants, all played essentially the same game plan, which is what George said before, all about territory, get it forward. And the game's changed significantly in the last 2 or 3 seasons. And it changed last year. I mean, Goody's talked about this a lot, is that, the games shift within a season. The season's so long. And if you look at Collingwood, compare the way Collingwood played their last 5 games, including their 3 finals, to their first 5 games of the season. Chalk and cheese, absolute chalk and cheese in terms of game style. There's none of this fast ball movement off the half-back flank. It was territory, contest, win the pressure stakes. And the game, 2 years ago, it was all about clearances. Now it's all about scores from turnover and transition and territory. I mean, it's all about getting it forward and keeping it forward. If you listen, go back, no one probably wants to. If you go back and listen to the way Collingwood talking about how they were setting up for the grand final, they were saying that where our plan is to get it in the forward line and keep it in there. And that's what Brisbane do. Brisbane play a little bit more of a, try and control the ball a little bit more because, but they still look to get it quickly inside their forward line and let their forwards go to work and ideally trap it in. So it's a long way of saying is that I actually think the whole competition shifted away from what, how we began the season. Everyone did. And as to whether, what that looks like for next season, I don't know. But what at the moment, you copy, the model seems to be you look at the template of the premiership winner and then that carries on to the next season. Well, that template is essentially the Demon template and the Pies template. The Blues, basically, Voss said he copied the way Melbourne, Blues are almost identical to us now in terms of the way they play footy, a bit more focused on winning clearances than us. almost like an old, like we were in 21. What that means for next season, I don't know. So I think that come finals and the big games, it will revert back to what it became, which is win the contest, get territory, and score on transition and stop the opposition scoring on transition.
George, anything you want to add?
I cannot add anything more to that. That completely stole my thunder. But I first saw the change in pre-season around about January, and if we adopt a different sort of style, I think we'll see the same thing this year. It was all about territory, getting the ball into the forward line as deeply as you could, as quickly as you could. And the reason for that is, I know this sounds boring, is the old money ball, but more importantly, statistics. The coaches and the statisticians don't just look at the number of possessions a player's got. It's what happens when the ball's in certain areas of the ground and which is the best option. If you watch NFL, gridiron games, they're all about that. You go, why didn't they take the kick? Why didn't they do that? It's all about percentages. Yeah. And that's what the coaches at all the top teams, as Binman has just said, Brisbane, Melbourne, Collingwood, Carlton, GWS all play the same sort of game. And that's because they've worked out that that's the best way to win the games. The best percentages, the most goals will be scored if you play that particular style. So I don't think you've got to, if you go to the watch the training sessions, look for it in January. You'll start to see the styles coming out. Just don't look at players kicking the ball. Look where they're kicking the ball and how the forwards are leading, how the defenders are working. And the other thing that statisticians have worked out is that most of the goals aren't scored from marking forwards. I know people who go to the football want to see forwards kicking goals. Most of the scores come from turnovers in the back line. Turnovers are the biggest score source for all the teams these days.
Exactly. And that's been a big shift, George, in the last 2 years, because 2 years ago, we talked about this during the season, it snuck up on the whole competition. 2 years ago, scores from clearances was the critical number. Now it's how many points you score from turnover, but probably even more importantly, how many the opposition do. And for us, in terms of, again, going back to that question about what went wrong, specifically what went wrong against the Blues was how many times we turned the ball over. In the last 2 games we lost against them, the one with the track non-goal and the qualifying final, the semi. The big difference in the numbers in that game was that they matched us. We got half as many points in both games, our season average around there for points from turnover, and they got almost twice their season average from points per turnover or something crazy like that. So that was the critical factor in both those games. And it's important to remember that both games were less than a goal in them. So it was huge for us. And so I think that, again, it puts such the emphasis on those players who cannot turn it over, because there's a lot of focus on, say, the Pies' ability to hit high-risk kicks, and that's great, and particularly if it then triggers a scoring chain. But really what gets lost a lot, I think, is the opportunity cost when you turn it over. Yes, there's an obvious problem when you turn it over and the opposition score. Everyone can see that. But it's the opportunity cost of the goal that you don't kick. That, Melbourne don't kick because 𝗟𝗨 doesn't hit that target and we lose it at half. And no better example of that was the last 60 seconds or 90 seconds of the Blues game. 𝗨ine hits that kick, gets it over the top of Wiedering. We win that game of footy. He doesn't. And so not only do we miss an opportunity to score and put that game to bed, it goes up the other end. It's essentially a 12-point play. It was on, he turned it over, even though we may not have scored. But if we had have scored, that's game over. But you think of the goal that's kicked on from the turnover. So it's critically important to have good quality kicks in the team.
And the other thing that teams are starting to do, particularly towards the end of last season, was putting time into the interceptors. Stop the levers, stop the mays in Melbourne's case. Stop the Howes and stop the Moores in Collingwood's case, and all of a sudden their whole game plan looks a little bit different. So I suspect we'll see a lot more work put into those sort of players to deny them the opportunity to intercept.
That's a good point. And likewise, on a similar sort of jag, is the other thing that teams did is they went to work on Collingwood's distributors. So even when I know, like even before Nick Daicos got injured, teams were sweating on him. Like in that game, he got injured against the Hawks. He didn't get injured at half time. He barely touched the ball because they ran a hard tag on him and give that distributor no time and space. You know who it's trying to get out to. It's, Collingwood, it's trying to get out to Pendlebury. It's trying to get out to either of the Daicos brothers to get it on the outside and then, hit a high-risk kick that sets up a scoring chain. Teams were sweating on that. So that's partly explains why the game ended up becoming, not the so fewer high risk taken because, all teams were putting time into the outside distributor.
This critique of Collingwood was brought to you by Stephen May. A few red wines in.
And long may he live.
Yes. Let's talk about departures. Royal Demon asked, do you think we will be hurt by any of our departures this season? In hindsight, was the Brodie Grundy recruitment a mistake? We've sort of talked about that. So we traded out 3 players. James Jordan and Brodie Grundy went to Sydney. James Harms went to the Bulldogs. We also had Michael Hibberd retire after 13 games for the Demons and All-Australian honours in 2017 and, of course, a premiership player in 2021. He's a great servant to the club who will be missed. I think we have some replacements in defence to cover him. What do you guys think, Big Man, in terms of we'll be able to replace Hibberd in the coming season?
Well, at least with Hibbo going, this season I won't write him off and get it wrong completely. One of the things that he brings is that energy, and that sort of will to compete. Funnily enough, I just picking up what George was saying before about McVie, he's a different type of player, McVie, and he's a bit classier, I guess, and moves a bit. He's a bit of a smoother mover. But he's got a bit of that as well. I think that's probably the thing that I wonder whether we'll miss. It's just his attack, his willingness. You need players like that, don't you, who are meat and potatoes, don't leave anything out on the field. He's a sort of heart and soul type player. So even if we can backfill him, if that's the word, we're always going to miss a player like that. And I don't know about you guys, but I thought his speech at the Bluey was just awesome.
Yeah, it was.
It was such a great speech, and I hadn't forgotten about it, but it was really touching to hear him talk about his brother. And I've always respected Hibbo, but after that, I was just sort of reflecting on, that happened. It was his best mate, his brother, and he still was able to suit up and play with that vigor and that sort of energy that he played with. That's probably where we're going to miss him most. Not so much his positional stuff, more of the energy he brings to the footy club.
Yeah, I think he'll be. Probably of all the ones that we've mentioned, the biggest loss. The pity is, his body was obviously starting to break down and wasn't able to play all the games that he would have wanted to. But it certainly gives the opportunity for Howes in particular and Turner to come in. There's a gap there. Same as like I said, McVie's shown the way. Do the work. The opportunity's there. The space is there. All you've got to do is get in, grab it with both hands. I know that sounds trite, but if you want to be a serious footballer, here's the opportunity right in front of you for those two players. So, we'll miss him. And just to reinforce what Bidman said, his speech at the Best and Fairest was just. It wasn't heart-wrenching. It was really heartfelt.
Yeah,
heartfelt.
Particularly when he came from the disaster that was at Essendon, and he's come to Melbourne, and he's really committed to the club and really felt at home during this period at the club.
Yeah, I thought the same thing, George. He was really. He talked about Melbourne like he's a Melbourne person in that speech. Like he was part of the fabric, and I knew that he was good mates with Melksham, but I didn't know how good a mates. Like basically, he said.
His brothers,
like his brother.
Yep.
And that he spent a fair bit of time thanking Melk, and good for the culture. So hopefully he'll I don't know what sort of role he might play, but hopefully he's around the club at some level.
James Jordan requesting a trade was no surprise. We were forecasting that all season on the podcast. We knew that if he wasn't going to be given adequate game time, then he would seek it elsewhere, and we would obviously not begrudge him that. I wish him very well at the Swans.
Do we get a bell for that, Andy?
Well, yeah.
A forecast we got right.
That wasn't hard. A blind man could have seen that coming. I wish him very well at the Swans. I hope he can get a regular gig there.
Well, I want a bell because I used Kennedy going to the Swans because he couldn't get minutes in the Hawks midfield as a example of what might happen to Jordan. Then he goes to the Swans. Can I get a bell for that?
Sorry.
Everyone's a comedian.
I think the difference with James Jordan is also he was unrestricted free agent as well, if I remember. So he could go wherever he wanted. So when you're being denied opportunity, you would go somewhere else. And I think
Grundy, he'll be a good fit for what they need. They need midfield grunt.
Yeah, particularly with Parker at the end of his run. As well, aging. So, there'll be more opportunity for Jordan there. Why wouldn't you?
Do you think that will hurt us in terms of depth as well? We're going to talk about James Harms as well, but just losing those two guys, potential midfielders in terms of injuries and stuff. How do you think that'll harm us depth-wise?
It's interesting, Andy, because sort of intersecting with what I was saying about the shift in the game. I had a back and forth conversation with someone on Demonland about this is, when Roos came to Melbourne in 2013, right through, is the sort of footy then was you needed somewhere between 8 to 10, 11 midfielders. And so, who could run through the midfield. That was the Roos model that he brought from the Swans, and that was basically the template in footy. Half the team were midfielders, your half-forward flankers. So think of, we had Vandenberg and Ballack, and we brought in, we had about 8 or 9 pure mids, essentially. But the game can't carry them anymore because you need those outside runners now. You need those players who can athletically run on the outside and who can transition the ball and can still win their own footy and win the contest. And so, it's interesting in terms of our midfield depth because you take out Harms, you take out Dunstan, and you take out, who's not on the list here, because he didn't go in.
Jordan.
And Jordan, suddenly your midfield depth is pretty low. I know we've brought in Billings, but he's not really a mid. But it sort of and we haven't drafted any midfield. So clearly wasn't identified as a need. And I just think the game's shifted where you really need your 3 or 4 key A-grade midfielders and then more sort of, flanker utility types.
And really, when you look back at the season, how many games did Jordan, Harms and Dunstan play in the midfield?
Jordan a few when he was replacing Oliver. So depth would be my query. But
that's what I was asking. We've got James Harms. He didn't have a great season this year, and I don't think he was the same player that he was a few years ago. I think he's limited in the roles that he can provide for us. He was an excellent tagger whenever we used him, but Goody doesn't employ that tactic. And whenever he did get a chance to play in other roles, whether off half-back and half-forward, he simply wasn't really effective. I wasn't a big fan of him in the half-back role that he played for a while at one stage. And I think this year when he came in as a forward, I can't remember which game it was, maybe the Richmond game or Hawthorn or something, he missed 2 very easy goals. So just wasn't doing, fulfilling those other roles rather than midfield as well. So I don't think we're going to miss him too much. I mean, I love the guy. He's a demon through and through. He's a premiership player in that respect.
I remember him,
but
it's just with 𝗍𝗲 is similar to 𝗍𝗲 too. It's probably worth noting for Harmsy is he had sort of personal stuff that game in the middle of the year, and I think similar to what George was saying about interrupted pre-seasons, it cannot be good for your footy or headspace if you're basically missing a month of footy in the middle of the season.
Let's go. Brodie Grundy, in hindsight, as we said, it probably didn't work out. And I discussed this before about the pre-season. We thought the Gaundy pairing would be a masterstroke, especially in that pre-season game when they both kicked 3 goals. But as I said, failed to launch. We had the injuries to Tom McDonald and Ben Brown. It didn't allow us to use Max and Brodie as the true resting rucks in the forward line. And as mentioned as well, I think the handling of Grundy towards the end of the year, something was up. We don't need to go into it anymore. And not using him in the finals might have been a mistake.
Grundy, Andy, is that, so to be fair to him, a big part of the problem was Max's inability to kick straight, really. I mean, because part of the model was that those two would wax, but, they basically said it. Well, it's not working, Maxi going forward, as George pointed out during the season. He's even less of a forward in some respects than Grundy, I reckon.
Yep. All right, we'll move on from that. I think we've talked about Grundy enough, and he's no longer a player. So we're into the trade part, but before I get into that, B-Man, you wanted to give a bit of a spiel before that. You ready to go?
I thought just at the end, when we finished talking about our trade and draft period, that if we each give a score, at A, B, C, or D, E, F, in terms of how that period went for us. For me, in terms of benchmarking that, there's a thread on Demonland that was up, or it's still there, is from what's needed in 2024. So I wrote this prior to the trading period began. So I just read this, but this sort of setting it from, this is my, assessment guide for how we did. From my perspective, our forward line issues are a furphy. All of our regular forwards, including Petty, are excellent set shots and are also pretty good from general play too. In my opinion, the key issue is the poor execution and lack of goal and goal assist from our mids and our utilities, for instance, our wingers, flankers, etc. So I wrote that if I was in charge of recruitment, I'd be focused on getting in one or two high-quality, high-half forwards who are elite athletes and decent kicks, i.e. two more nibblers, who, by the by, was our best kick inside 50 this year in terms of kick-to-score ratio. Bedford would be the ideal type of player, and yes, I know he's not coming back, but he's the player that I was thinking of, that I'd be focusing on getting a mid-size half-forward, utility mid, who's an elite athlete, above average to elite kick, wins their own ball, and kicks goals. And the player type I'm thinking of is McCarthy and Bailey from the Lions. Sparrow's sort of similar, it's sort of our equivalent. We need more Sparrows, but I'd like to see Sparrow kicking more goals. I don't think he was impactful enough in that space. I think we also needed a distributor from half back or wing or outside mid, similar to the role that Nick Dacos has created, with elite kicking and decision-making skills who can reliably execute difficult high-risk kicks, even under intense pressure. 𝗟𝗍 and 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁, as we talked about, have been these players for us, but for different reasons, neither were able to play that role to the required level. The sort of player I'm thinking of is players like Lakacious, Anderson, and Coleman is probably a really good example. I mean, he was so critical in that, particularly that first final, with his ability to hit high-risk kicks and create scoring opportunities. I'd be focused, I was thinking prior to all of that, to the draft and trade period, a second ruck, and I've got no idea, I had no idea when I wrote this who that would be, or as an example. And just in relation to that mid-size half-forward utility mid, that I think that we struggle to defend, ironically, but we don't have that sort of player. It's worth noting, so that mid-size, players who are elite athletes, above average to elite kick, win their own ball and kick goals. It's worth noting that in the grand final, and it sort of speaks to George's point about really the lack of impact of key forwards to some degree, that in the grand final, McCarthy and Bailey both kicked 2 goals, and their combined 4 goals was nearly a third of the Lions' 13 goals. If you add in Hugh McCluggage 2 goals, who also had a match-high 3-goal assists, and Robertson's goal, more than half of the Lions' goals were kicked by these sorts of players, mid-sized, non-permanent forward utility types. And half of Collingwood's 12 goals came from their midfielders. And that's a big area, a big gap for us. I also thought that we really needed to bring in some serious leg speed. And, of course, as I've banged on about a lot over the years, we need to be bringing in players who, if not elite kicks, are at the very least above average kicks, because, that's a huge issue for us. So that's what I was hoping for from the trade and draft period. And as we go through, the conversation about how we went, I think that we filled some of those gaps.
Well, we're going to go through sort of each player so you can talk about that, whether we met the bar that you've set there. Lefty says, just wanted to thank you guys for another stellar season of podcasting. You took the show to another level, and I really love that you opened the discussion up to the audience via the questions and comments, and I'm happy to have contributed to the conversation over the year. It's great to have you back, even if it's just a little taste before the new season. What did you guys make of our acquisitions over the trade period in terms of personnel? All seem to fill a certain role. Do you think any or all are a lock to play round one or be a regular fixture in the side? Are we still a destination club? So Shane McAdam, our first acquisition was Shane McAdam from Adelaide, the Adelaide Crows, for a future second-round pick. Goal-kicking medium forward, McAdam will help cover the loss of Jake Melksham. Melbourne list manager Tim Lamb said, we know the sort of exciting, fast-paced football Shane can produce, and his skill set is one that will complement our existing group. We feel his best football is still ahead of him, and we look forward to seeing what he can bring to the red and blue. Bin Man, thoughts on Shane McAdam? Mute. You're on mute.
That's just the old-fashioned mute problem.
Yeah.
I've watched his highlights too. I've always liked McAdam. So I was rapt that we brought him in. But McAdam, he's not really McCarthy and Bailey type in that sense that, he's not going to go on ball, is he? So he's not someone who can roll through the middle who's like a utility mid-size. But he is an excellent kick, so that for me is a big tick. I watched some footage of him kicking today. Really nice, neat action, short run up, which I like. And I think they've brought him in for Melk's role. So not only Melksham was important, but the role Melksham was playing, and it sort of touches on what George was saying before about the time teams were putting into the intercept markers. Melksham was our player who became almost the best player in the AFL at playing that exact role, but also being an offensive option. So I think he'll come in, and I reckon he will be in the round one side of all things being equal, and he's fit because he'll play that role, also provides a mid-size marking option. The other thing I thought that McAdam might also free them up to, if they need Fritter to play a bit of a different role. So, for instance, maybe they want Fritter to get away from the goal square a bit and play higher up the ground and have him kicking inside 50. I think that McAdam will give them some sort of flexibility around more flexibility on how they use Fritter. They may not want to mess with Fritter's role, but if they do for any particular reason, he's a mid-sized marking option, not unlike Fritter. So I think that it's a big tick for me.
Are there any concerns? There was word sort of that I'd heard, and I don't know where now. I'm trying to rack my brains where I heard this, whether it was just on social media or whether it was actually something I read in an official mainstream media article about that he had some issues with who was our training guy that's at Adelaide? Burgess, that he had some issues with Burgess.
That's right.
It was a far more serious allegation. It came directly from the best source, which was Demonland.
Oh, it was Demonland. Okay, so maybe not. I apologise.
No, I heard that in the newspaper.
Oh, okay, yeah. So if it did come from if it just was some random poster, apologise. But if it did come from the mainstream media, then it could be a concern. And then we've had some track watchers earlier trainings, sort of just by watching, saying that they don't think he's as fit as, and in terms of aerobic fitness, as some of the other players. So is that a concern?
Maybe they, maybe he hadn't put the dots together that the 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀𝗁 is like the protege, and by all accounts is even more hardcore. So,
yeah,
it'll be interesting. But I think Ben Mann's probably right with McAdam. When he was first selected, I thought, where's his role? Where does he go? The Melksham role is obviously the replacement needed for that, but it's going to put more pressure on other players like Spargo again to hold your place or even get back a place when you've got a McAdam there. So it'll be interesting. It will be interesting as to whether he's fit enough to play round one and what his role will be in the season.
He seems like McAdam seems more like a stay-at-home sort of, or in the forward 50 arc, whereas Spargo's that more high half forward role. But go ahead, Bin Man.
Yeah, I was going to say another big sort of positive I thought about McAdam coming was that he nominated us, which I thought was a good, it's always good when players nominate the Ds. That's a good sort of sign of respect for the club. But the other aspect that I think is brilliant and sort of related to him nominating us is he's Aboriginal. And I think that that's sort of a big, positive that he feels that, he obviously you'd expect he would have talked to 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝘀 and, and so that I think that that's a real positive in terms of a big tick for the club that, an Aboriginal player has gone out of his way to say, I want to go to that club. And, without putting too fine a point on it, it's probably also similarly, some sort of comment about where Adelaide is in that space.
He doesn't have to play alongside Tex.
Yeah, he doesn't have to play exactly alongside Tex or,
Those highlights were nice today that we saw from training, and there was one nice bit of play between 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝘁 and McAdam that got me excited. So I'm looking forward to see what we'll see from him. Tom Fullerton with pick 46, which we received from the Grundy trade. We acquired the services of ruck forward Tom Fullerton. From the Lions, Fullerton has struggled for opportunities at Brisbane, playing just 19 games since being recruited as a Category B rookie in mid-2018, and he didn't play a senior game in 2023. D's list manager Tim Land said, "We're really pleased to welcome a tall and athletic player in Tom to the club. We have seen what he is capable of, not only at senior level, but through some dominant performances in the VFL. We look forward to seeing what he can produce as a Demon." George.
Yeah, I'm always interested in the trade period. It's a bit like when people go out and buy a house. You can only buy what's available on the market at the time. And ruckmen are a particularly rare species. It's not surprising that Sydney have been following the Moneyball program with their ruckmen over the last 15 years at least. They just go out and get a ruckman to fill a role. I think this is a good example for Fullerton. There weren't many other options. I think Flynn from GWS, some people were touting as being a possibility, but there's just nobody else available at the end of the day. So you go for what the best available. The interest. I was speaking with a Brisbane fan the other day, and they were sort of a bit of ambivalent about Fullerton. Brisbane primarily have McInerney, and then they use Ford as a backup, and Fullerton still didn't play a game last year. So bit in two minds about him. The other advantage is that when you've got T-Mac and Ben Brown, who are fragile, let's call that, he provides at least another option up forward. We really struggled in their absence last year as a result of their injuries. So he might fill that role. Not overly enthusiastic about it as a whole. He's not tall enough to be a ruckman the way ruckmen are these days. These 199 or 200. That's not ruckman size anymore. Yes, we got probably the best available that was in that role, but we'll just have to wait and see with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tick, isn't it? Because we need it, as I noted, we need a second ruck. Even if he doesn't get in the seniors, we need as you noted last year about 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝘀 losing, we didn't have any ruck basically.
Not at all.
We need some coverage at 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝘀 as well, although we've probably got it to a degree with 𝗣𝗲𝗀 and
Varel.
What's the other big fella?
Varel.
Yeah. So tick for me, but that's why I thought in terms of rating this period is that I've really got no sense of how good Fullerton is or could be. I'm not really good at the sort of, looking at the juniors either coming in, and you never know, like you can't, that's why I thought, looking at assessing it based on what I thought we needed as opposed, because, we won't know until 5-6 years down the track whether the Colt is any good and whether the Duke can play. And so, it's a bit of hindsight with that stuff, and the same goes for Fullerton. But we needed a second ruck to come in, and we've got one, so all power to him.
Jack Billings, former number 3 draft pick, Jack Billings was traded to the D's for the Saints for a future third-round pick. At 28 years old, Billings has managed just 11 games in the past 2 seasons due to a combination of injury and selection. Melbourne list manager Tim Lamb believes Billings has a long career ahead of him at the Demons, describing him as a talented young player with still a lot of footy ahead of him. Young at 28 years old, big man.
Big tick, I reckon. He's a bit wobbly kicking for goal, which is a bit unfortunate because he's a small half forward, but he is an excellent field kick. He's a really good field kick. He's a goal kicker. If he kicks straight, let's say he's a goal and point kicker. And he is someone who can play that McCarthy and Bailey sort of half forward utility, bit of mid, not really midfield in the centre bounce, but midfield at throw-ins and around the ground stoppages. That's the role he plays. That's his best footy. So big tick. I don't know what the deal with him at the Saints was, but I could see him coming in straight into the team. He's an AFL player ready to go. He was a top 5 draft pick, wasn't he? Billings from memory.
Third pick, yeah. Three.
Yeah. So, I think if we get 10 games out of him, big tick for me.
I think he was, given that he was a future third round pick, basically we've got him for nothing, especially since we didn't use him, for example, this year, the third round picks. So the big question mark with Billings is his body. He played only 3 games last year and 9 the year before. So whether his body will hold up, he's certainly got the talent. He's got the skill. He's one of those players that just pops up and annoys the hell out of the opposition because he doesn't seem to do much and then kicks 2 or 3 goals, from his very skilled talents. If he does something for us, like you said, if he gets 10 games out of it, it's a big positive for us.
Now, I didn't have this name on our in regards to the trade period. Harrison Petty, there was quite a bit of noise around him regarding Adelaide, and he is contracted. There was vision of him playing golf with some Adelaide players. Seems like a lock that he's going to go there next year. I'll fall off my chair if he stays at the D's. Given he's made of glass in terms of injuries, and given also that we do need him as a forward this year, do you think maybe we should have traded him now and tried to get the best thing, or go and roll the dice and?
No way. I was pretty pissed off with all of that because no one's telling me that wasn't a complete setup. I mean, Christ almighty. I mean, that was the day, wasn't it the day before the draft? Or so the day before the trade period began or ended, or
I don't know, but I don't know.
He just happens to have a film crew rock up to a game of golf that he's playing in South Australia. I mean, no doubt that's what his manager set up, but come on, Harrison, he's not. This idea too that he's homesick, for God's sake. He lived away from home from 15 and went boarded in Adelaide for a 15-year-old. So I wasn't super impressed, I have to say, with all of that.
Seemed like it was all coming from Adelaide, but there must have been something, whether his management...
classic manager thing, and
Cane Corns.
Cane Corns, yeah.
All right, we'll move on.
But one thing I will say about Petty is that it was pretty funny how quickly he became our messiah. I guess he kicked straight and he played well, but, he only played 3 games as a forward. It was,
Well, the problem was we didn't have any other... I mean, with the exception of JVR, we were desperate.
A big loss,
and that might be another reason for Fullerton as well. That if that were to eventuate, and Ben Brown and T-Mac are getting close to the end.
Yeah.
What do we do in 2025?
Yeah.
Are we hoping Jefferson comes good?
Yeah. So no way should they trade him. Play hardball.
Yep.
Dominion says, would love to get the panel's thoughts on another Tim Lamb special with trading up in the draft order by trading picks 14, 27 and 35 for picks 11, which became pick 13 on draft night. The D's secured Gold Coast's prized pick 11 as part of a multi-club, multi-trade pick swap. The D's received pick 11 in exchange for picks numbers 14, 27 and 35, as Dominion said. When I interviewed Jason Taylor on the Demonland podcast, which you can find on whichever app you're listening to now, it should be the one before this one, Jason Taylor said that we were only ever going to use 2 picks in the draft, so being able to trade up from 14 to 11 made sense for two reasons. One, it simply moves you up in the draft order based on our rankings, and two, it gives us, the Ds, a better opportunity to perhaps trade up again, which obviously didn't pan out. George, what did you think about our trading up in the draft, and was it successful in your eyes?
I think the second option that you just talked about was what was our ultimate aim, that we were trying to trade up to get a Harley Reid. We didn't get to that stage because either West Coast refused. Well, West Coast did refuse what we were offering. You've also got to be able to get sufficient other picks to make it attractive to them. I think West Coast shot themselves in the foot in a big way, and they will in the future as a result of that. They could have had 3 first-round draft picks this year, and they've chosen to have 1. If the Harley Reid story doesn't work out for them, they've completely blown their opportunities. They are definitely going to be down the bottom of the ladder and be down there for a long time to come. But back to what our needs are, yes, I think we tried to get up in, not just to get better picks, but we were aiming for something bigger. Unfortunately, that also depended on the people you're trying to trade with to be able to get them to agree to it. If they don't agree to it, well, we finished up with higher picks as a sort of second prize. So it's not seen as a fail. They obviously tried very hard, and we still finished up with good draft picks regardless. And from, everybody says it didn't seem to be a really deep draft. The enthusiasm that was there this year, so not only having 2 picks for a start off, I think was all we needed. We recognised that, and Jason Taylor recognised it. Tim Land recognised it. We just stuck to our guns and got what we wanted with the best available.
Anything you want to add, B-Man, to that conversation?
All of that pre-season sort of Machiavellian shenanigans is all Greek to me.
Well, let's get into draft selections. Singer says, welcome back, guys, albeit briefly. We really appreciate the podcast during the season. It's evident that a lot of hard work and preparation goes into it, so thanks for that. In regards to our draft picks, what did you make of our selections, in particular passing on Daniel Curtin, and what are the panel's thoughts on drafting for needs versus drafting for best available? Andy, I know you asked Jason Taylor this exact question in your excellent interview with him, but I'd love to hear what you guys think. Thanks, Singer. Well, let's go through our draft selections in the 2023 National Draft. Caleb Windsor, our initial pick 5, became pick 6 and then became pick 7 after North's compensation pick and the Suns Academy selection. With pick 7, we selected outside midfielder / winger with a guy who has some X factor and speed, Caleb Windsor from the Eastern Rangers. B-Man, you must be excited to have an elite ball user at our club.
Elite ball user, elite athlete, left foot kick. I love left foot kicks. He's left footer, isn't he?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Kudos, by the way, for that interview with Taylor. Fantastic interview. I looked up a dictionary the other day for the word phlegmatic, and there was a picture of Taylor. He doesn't give much away.
No.
But it made me laugh, that point that Singer makes about that. You asked him about that, need. Is it, your draft for need or for talent, for best available? He says best available, but completely contradicted himself, a bit later. And I suspect that, partly why I was wanting to talk about this, the type of players that I think we needed, because I think that that's what they did. I think it's very, very much so went after what they needed as opposed to best available. I got the feeling just from that comment, you try to read between the lines, I guess, a little bit, but my gut feeling was on Curtin that I might be wrong on this, but my feeling was that Taylor didn't rate him as highly as perhaps what others, Phantom Drafts or whatever did.
Well, I think a few other clubs didn't rate him either.
Yeah, what did he slide to? He went down
Well, people thought he'd go pick 4 or something. So
I think that they very much went for need. So on the Duke, we've finally got another Duke at the club. So he is an elite kick, which, as you pointed out, he's quick, and he's someone who very much, I reckon, they've brought in to play exactly that distributor role from half-back or wing, the Nick Dacos role, essentially. He's an excellent athlete by all accounts, and I think other thing that that I think, as I noted before, that we've got a real need for, and has become a really big thing in footy, is leg speed. And I don't mean leg speed in the sort of acceleration like track, for over 20 metres or 10 metres, or, not that power. Is leg speed over, 50 metres. And he looks the goods from that perspective. So definitely big tick for me from, at least the type of player, who knows, as I said before, what level he'll get to. I think every player we draft in is going to become a star. I didn't think that about Weed, though, I have to say, or Lucas Cook. But, so big tick. And I reckon that if he's fit enough, there's every chance he'll come into round one contention to play that distributor role from halfback, the Nick Dacos role, really, which remarkable influence that young fella's had on the game, actually.
George, anything on Caleb?
I know nothing about the drafting of players. I would only point out that even high draft picks do not make up a difference in their first year. You've only got to look back at the last couple of years, the Cadmans, the Jason Horne-Francis, the Harry Sheezels. They're all great players and will be, but it'll be in the future. They don't make a great deal of difference in their first year, and I don't expect them to.
Nick Dacos is he's the exception.
Yeah. Well, he's a freak.
Yeah, exactly. But for most draftees, they don't make the difference. I don't know. That's why we have Jason Taylor to do these sort of things. In terms of needs, or I think it's drafting is needs for the future, whereas trading is needs for the current circumstances. So you draft for talent, but it's for the future. So that, I think that's something that people forget. You're not going to bring in a draftee that's going to change your current arrangements in your team, as West Coast are going to find out this year.
All right, so just on that drafting for current needs or best available, so when pick 7 did roll around, that was the Windsor pick, many Demonlanders were surprised and some were rapt that the West Australian defender Daniel Curtin was still available. Dees ultimately chose Windsor, and Curtin was immediately snapped up by the Crows, who traded up the draft to secure his services, so they were obviously keen to get him. And we currently are in desperate need for good ball users, particularly going into the forward 50, as we've said. Caleb Windsor, who ticks that box, might take time to develop. When I spoke to Jason Taylor, he, of course, believed that Windsor was the best available and also sort of suits our current needs. It should also be noted that Stephen May will be 32 at the start of 2024 and will need a replacement in a few years' time, maybe sooner. George, any thoughts on... any further thoughts on
Curtin?
Yeah.
I think it was quite simple. As Bin Man just said, I don't think Taylor rated him, or else he would have taken him. Yeah. Straight, we had the opportunity.
I guess that's what it comes down to, because...
and I think in Stephen May's situation, he seems to be one of those sort of players that's going to last for a long time. He never gets injured. He even played in the grand final with a rip in his hamstring. He seems to be quite durable. He's just built, some players just seem to last forever. So while he's aging, he's still playing 20 plus games a year. So that's when they start to get the inevitable calf injury. That's the one you've got to watch for. When that happens, it's almost over.
And we've got Disco Turner. Turner is going to be he's going to be a player. When he gets bigger physically in the next couple of years, I mean, he's the obvious sort of place. He'll come in for Lever or May at some point, won't he?
Yep.
We have a caller on the line, a special guest all the way from Belgium, I believe, isn't it, Terence?
It is, Andy. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Bin Man and George, good to hear you guys. I really missed you for the last 87 days. So I wasn't sure whether to call now, but as you said, you put me on hold until it was appropriate, Andy, so I'll go quickly, okay? So firstly, thanks so much for everything that you guys do. I haven't rung in this year because the change in format has been really terrific with all of the questions, and there's a lot more people out there who are much smarter than I am in terms of some of the in-depth questions that they ask compared with what I was asked in the last couple of years. So that's been really good. But I did want to just take a moment this season to just say, as I say, thank you on behalf of all of us who are overseas as well as interstate and don't have the opportunity to be able to get to watch some of the games or to watch some of the training. So great. The analysis has been, I've learned so much in the last 2 years, 3 years, I guess, with the way that we looked at strategy and then again, the answers to many of the questions. So I feel a much more complete football watcher or supporter in that sense. So again, kudos to the three of you, okay? I did want, that was a terrific interview, and I know I reached out to you separately on the interview.
Yeah, thank you for that.
With Lam, yeah. And as I cheekily said to you, I think the one question I would have liked to have confronted him with was, so are these guys really elite kicks, that we were getting? Because I think, again, we talk about the forward line, we talk about connection, all of that kind of stuff. And I think it's been brought up many times during the year with the podcast that without our ability with the midfield to be able to kick accurately and predictably, I think that's been a big problem for us. So I am interested as to whether these young guys coming in are going to be elite kicks. But then I think it begs the question for me, and I'd be interested in your thoughts when I finish, that, we love Track, we love 𝗍cie for everything that he brings. Angus, I'm just so delighted he's going to be coming back again. He's my favourite player. And Clary, of course. But, when we look halfway through the season, I think it was judged that Max and was it Track and, Max and 𝗍cie were what the 2 or 3 worst kicks out of the top 50 with some connection. We love these guys. We want them to stick around for a long time. But, if they're going to be playing in the midfield and not giving younger elite kicks an opportunity, is that going to hamper our progress? So I'll leave that question out there just for a moment. And in that context, we talked about disappointments. I don't want to be negative on any of the players, but I was hoping that Hunter, when he came in this year, I was hoping that he would be a more predictable and reliable kick. I know many of us are not that excited about the way that he bounce passes the ball and things like that, but it seems to have been effective. But as far as kicking, I guess I've been a little bit disappointed with him this year. And then last thing before I finish up is we talked about the retentions that we have, and both in the AFL and also the AFLW. So I'm really excited about the players that we're retaining. The one that I didn't realise was up for renewal was Choco Williams. And that happened 2/3 of the way through the year, where he signed on again for 2024. And I have to say, I was so delighted that he signed on again, because he's the one, if we're going to get any improvement in terms of kicking from our midfield or anyone else for that matter, and the young guys with the DNA program, Choco is the one that I think is going to be headlining that and making sure that those guys can be the best that they can be. So Andy, Thanks to you guys. Merry Christmas and all of that. And I'll take my answer off here, but just give me a chance to get back into the system again, okay?
No problem. Appreciate the call, Terence. And while you're,
thank you.
While you're logging back on, so you can listen. Yes. So I'll hang up on you and you go log back in. Cheers.
Do that. Okay. Thanks again.
While Terence is logging back in. Big man, do you want to take, there's a few things there. Hunter?
Just running through a few of those things from Terence, but he makes a good point. I think it was actually in the bottom 50, it was Oliver. I'm not sure where it was in the league, but our 3 least effective players kicking inside 50 from kicking to score ratio, from kicking inside 50 to it can be converted into a score. Our 3 worst were Max, Clary, and Track. Our best was Nibbler, as I said. But that is an issue. But I'm of the view is that as I said before, you need 5 or 6 elite kicks. There's always going to be ball butchers. Every team's got ball butchers. You just need to have them balanced. If you don't have enough players who they can give it to, essentially. So I think that partly, that was partly why it's so important to bring a player like Billings in, to bring a player like the Duke in, because you need those players who can be a distributor. We don't have enough of those players. So again, it's also similarly why it's important that 𝗟𝗍𝗀 plays well, because then 𝗍𝗀 can get into more aggressive positions, and you've got a player like McAdam who can be kicking inside 50. So for me, it's not about, I think that is a weakness of those three players. It's reducing our reliance on them being the player kicking inside 50 by having other players on the outside like McVie or whoever who can do that and take more of that. Hunter's an interesting one. There's a fair bit of criticism of Hunter on Demonland. I thought his last quarter of the season wasn't great. I thought he was terrific for the first half of the season, actually, and much underrated. I read with interest on Demonland today a track watcher saying that he looks a lot fitter. Maybe it was Danny Z. He's lost some weight and is looking in good nick. So, I hope that's the case. I was pretty disappointed with his last bit of the season, and there's always a question mark over his off-field stuff. That seems to go, wherever he goes, there's chat about his off-field stuff, Hunter. So hopefully he's got his head in the game and comes back fit and stronger. And there was another point that Terence made that I can't quite remember, but I'll think of it in a sec.
He said Choco Williams, but I don't know if that's the...
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree. He is a great signing, but I had to laugh because Choco Williams has been here through our period of time when we couldn't hit the bloody side of a barn.
Well, if you recall, the beginning of the year, there was a lot of kudos on him for fixing up our kicking for goal, but it was our kicking for goal and the entries into the forward 50 that ended up sinking us at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So
imagine how bad we'd be without that.
Yeah. So, there's still a lot of work to do. And I've always been of the opinion, if you can't kick, I don't think there's maybe for your technique for set shot goals, but in-game stuff, I don't think you can ever fix up anyone once they've been, once they're at that age.
Strong on his process, for set shot process. You create a process and you follow it.
Even that gets thrown out of the window under pressure, and someone's got a bad high ball drop like track. Didn't fix it.
That's what
go.
That's what I find so amazing about people like Jason Taylor. If they've come out and said we've got elite kicks, I don't know how they assess it at the TAC Cup level. There's the pressure is so much less there. Elite kicks are needed under pressure, and there's no tagging allowed in TAC Cup or whatever it's called these days, and it is not at AFL level. So you can see very good kicks at that level, but whether that'll transition to the AFL level is something that that's the miracles of good recruiters to be able to identify those things. So it'll be interesting.
It's not that bloody hard. It's all the key word you said there is technique. I mean, you can see McVie why he's going to be an elite kick because he's got an excellent technique. Same with Caleb Windsor. You watch him; he actually guides the ball to his boot, like that they taught you when you're a little kid kicking the footy. So good technique. Pressure, it will stand up to pressure much better. McAdam looks like he's got good technique. JVR's got good technique. Our forward line is generally the good kickers, as I was saying before.
Onto Colton. Our pick 11 became pick 13 on draft night, and with that pick, we took the strong-bodied attacking half-forward Western Australian Colton Tolstrup. He looks to have an AFL-ready body and has plenty of senior footy experience playing for Subiaco in the Waffle. He also has Cult Hero written all over him with those trademark sunnies and mop of curly hair. I will add that he will join Stephen May as our sponsored player, replacing Brodie Grundy. Seems to be lot...
Jokes.
No jokes.
No jokes about the Demonland curse.
Stephen May's been all right.
Yes.
There seems to be a lot to like about this kid. Big man, are you excited for the Colton Tolstrup experience from Esperance?
Totally. I mean, again, you watch those highlights and everyone's a future All-Australian. But, he's an elite kick. By all account, also a brilliant athlete. And from what I read is really quite mature and, he seems to have his head head in the game, quite switched on young fella despite the curly hair and the glasses. He looks like 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 with, a bit more maturity potentially. But he is absolutely, pardon the pun, tailor-made to come in and play the high half forward role. And I have no doubt that that's what they've got in mind for him, to run between the arcs, basically run up and down the ground all day, and slot in to the opposite flank to Nibbler. He's another player I could see playing round one.
Yep.
Because that position, as I've been banging on about, has become one of the most important positions of footy. It's critical you have players who can run between the arcs at speed all game, that repeat sprints. It's really, as I pointed out during the season, that was the difference for the Blues. When the Blues came good, it was because they brought in those Cunningham and Cotterill and those players who could run, 15, 16 kilometres a game, 8 of which are at speed. And that's what they've brought him in for. I can't. It was interesting, your question about whether he might be a mid at some stage. Taylor said, at some stage. But for me, it was a bit like they say that about every player. They said that about Bowery, remember? They said that about, maybe at some stage he will get some midfield minutes. But he hasn't played any of his junior footy as a mid. He's been a forward. So I think that he's a really good get, hopefully, in terms of need, and hopefully he'll also be, he'll live up to his potential.
And more importantly, absolutely, utterly do not cut that hair. It ruined Ben Brown and it ruined Langdon. So, he's got to keep that mop.
Well,
it's quite impressive, isn't it?
I'll let him know when I meet him early in the new season. Kynan Brown, the Brown legacy at the Demons continues, with Kynan Brown, the son of former Demon Nathan, being pre-selected as a rookie under the father-son rule. Kynan's contested game and tackling are among his strengths, with his consistent play for Vic Metro earning him the side's best and fairest for his play at the National Carnival. Many Demonland track and 𝗙cie watchers have already had a good look at the 181-centimetre midfielder who trained with the club earlier this season and pulled on the red and blue twice this year for the 𝗙cie Demons in the VFL, kicking a major in both appearances. The inside midfielder also kicked a bag of 5 goals for the Chargers in finals football this year, highlighting another string to his bow and a possible future forward of the ball. George or Big Man, have you had the opportunity to see Kynan play or train, and what are your thoughts?
Only those couple of games that he played at 𝗙cie last year, and look, you can't take much from those. He's playing well above his grade to get that level in the first place, so that's a positive. But he's obviously a developmental prospect, and taken as a rookie pick, it's just a free kick to us.
Yeah.
So we can only wait and see with that. Don't expect anything in the short term by any stretch.
The only thought I haven't seen him play at all. I can't recall whether I've seen him at 𝗙cie, but just the footage I've seen him or the photos, he's wiry little bugger, but he's not very big, is he?
181.
181, I just said.
Yeah.
Is that big?
I don't know.
Just under 6 foot.
It's bigger than
5'11".
He looks very wiry. He looks very, so yeah, free kick really, isn't it? In terms of him being at the club, and he'll be good mates with 𝗍ici's son when he gets there. Hopefully.
Yeah. So Jason Taylor mentioned that both Jeff White's son Kalani and Adam 𝗍ici's son Noah very much on the radar, and in the next few years' drafts, as well as he mentioned that Marley Davey, son of Aaron Davey, will be coming down from Cairns to do his schooling at one of the college, maybe Xavier or something like that. So that's good that he'll be down here, and if good enough, he'll get into one of the TAC Cup teams. And that's
I like how Taylor kept on calling you Andrew. I might.
Well, that's through my contact at the club, and that's my email. So that's my professional. That's my professional. Andy's my stage name. Andrew's my professional name via email.
But my rating, based on what I thought the needs were, I feel like that they ticked all of the boxes that I thought they needed to tick in terms of what we needed, what our gaps were for 24. So I give the draft and trade period an A. It would be an A+ if I was a bit more confident in Fullerton. But as George said, I couldn't even think of a player. When I was trying to think of a player who might be out there in the ether who could be that sort of tall forward / ruckman, I couldn't even think of one, let alone Fullerton. So I think they've done fantastic.
Delightful Play says, I've missed the podcast. Hope you've enjoyed the well-earned break and will continue to do so over the holiday period. We've seen our recruitment aim to bring in some more speed, for example, with our draftees Windsor, Colton Brown, and foot skills / goal sense with our trades, Billings and McAdam. Do you think this will be reflected in our game plan to become faster moving / enable some riskier conversions into our forward 50? Or is this to supplement our team and assist with our assist with executing our current game plan better? She says from 2023 latter half of the season, not the 2023 preseason or earlier iterations in 2021 or 2022. Monocular says, great work again, guys. So much appreciated. How do you feel that our incoming players, McAdam and Fullerton, maybe Billings and Tolstrup, will impact our forward transition and connection? It has appeared to have been our biggest weakness in 2022 and 2023. So, Big Man, then George, what impact do you think any or all of our new recruits via the trade and draft will have on our game plan in 2024?
Well, I don't think massive, to be honest. I think more it'll help us execute our game plan because, as George noted, the games have become about territory. As I was saying, scores from scores on transition and scores from turnover, stopping the opposition scoring from on transition and scoring from turnover is really where the game's at. And taking that game against the game we lost, the home and away game we lost to the Blues, it was a classic example. We win that game if we turn it over 3 times less than we did. We win that game. And so I don't think they'll have any major impact on our game plan as such. It will hopefully just improve our ability to, not give the ball back to the opposition, to take advantage, to not turn it over on transition. As I was saying, transition, when you've got the ball and you turn it over, it's opportunity cost. There's a potential scoring chain that's been broken. Everyone knows it when the opposition score from the turnover, but really as important is the goal that you leave on the table because you've given the ball back. And, it gives me cold sweats to think of Stephen May and McDonald in the back half. Both of them, for good kicks, turn the ball over for those 15, 20-metre kicks way too often. And it really, really hurts you.
George, anything you want to add about our new recruits?
Not really.
It's too hard to...
Yeah, it'll be about executing the game plan. People like Billings have got that capability. McAdam have got that capability. Fullerton we don't know about. I don't expect that the draftees will be providing anything very much in the first season.
Smurf asks, I wonder if you had a good look at our fixture for 2024 and what are your thoughts? Thoughts on the opening round concept, the back-to-back Adelaide games, no Friday night games, lots of travel, and no Geelong. So before we have any answers to that, here are some stats about our fixture. This is all round 0 to 15 because we don't have days for the ones after round 15. 4 Thursday night games, 4 Sunday day games, 1 Saturday day game, 2 Saturday night games, 0 Friday nights. Anzac Eve away, King's Birthday away, 14 at the G, 7 interstate. One of those is a home and 6 are away. 2 buys, round 6 and round 14. 0 games at Geelong. As the boys, have you had a good look at next season's fixture? Are you happy with it? Not happy? Indifferent? Anywhere? Anyone? Anywhere? Anytime? George?
Not really much. We're a top 4 side. We've got to expect these sort of draws. Use the word draw.
Fixture.
Thursday night. Thursday night or Friday night. I think that's all about. The sponsors, in any case, it's a pain in the bum for the supporters, Thursday night games, particularly with young kids. nothing unexpected. Obviously, and I suspect the AFL wanted to reward Carlton as much as they possibly could, so they handed out huge numbers of games on the Friday night, in particular to them. But we've got enough on Thursdays to keep our sponsors happy, I would have thought. But yeah, it's anywhere, anytime. If you seriously, as a top 4 side, you've got to play anywhere, anytime. Don't care about Geelong, because Geelong are going to be rubbish in any case wherever you play them.
I probably, as a good indication of where I'm at on that, still not accepting I'm still a long way from acceptance, is unlike most years where I pour it over the fixture and think, weigh it all up. Is it good? Is it bad? I could barely tell you, apart from that Thursday night thing. I don't know, George, is commercially Thursday night as good for the club as a Friday night? Because that was my only thought. That's a big, not having any Friday nights, isn't it?
It gives you the free to air is the main.
Yeah, right. Okay.
The main thing. So yeah,
it's not the marquee, but maybe it'll become more of a marquee because there's a bunch of them this year, isn't there? So that was my only thought. I mean, the only other thing, I really haven't looked at it in strength or weaknesses like I did in previous, like I normally would. But the only thought I had is that I think I'm right in saying, maybe you said it too, Andy, then, is that we've got the most number of games at the G that we've had for a number of years.
I'm not sure. We're playing 14 at the G for the season, so I'm not sure how that tracks with other seasons.
14 out of 20, 23? Is it
24? 23, yeah.
Yeah. So that's, that's a positive.
Well, that's if you think we can play and win at the G, because we seem to struggle in September.
You're asking the wrong person for positives here.
Yeah, well, I mean, even a positive just for me to be able to go to the MCG and watch Melbourne play, 14 games at the G, albeit all 14 of them. So.
Yeah, exactly.
We do have a lot of away games this year, interstate travel type games. 7 interstate, but that includes our Alice Springs game.
The one thing, Andy, I thought, though, this is in 100% honesty, I really didn't look at it at all because I was still in a headspace of the whole thing, was thinking about the first time we played Collingwood. And, I had a funny thought about it. I was thinking, I don't know if that I even will go, because it was such an awful experience, but it's going to be awful. A Queen's birthday, it will be awful, because the Melbourne fans will be ropeable. And is it our home game this year?
No. And that's another thing. We both neither of those two big games, the Anzac Eve or King's birthday, that's in our away year. And I know we've said it.
But we get to play Collingwood twice.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
I'm dreading that already.
So we also have another part of this fixture. We're playing Adelaide back to back. So we play Port Adelaide on a Thursday night. I'm not sure whether it's a Thursday night, but we play Port Adelaide, then we play Adelaide 2 weeks in a row, both at Adelaide. So I'm assuming and I'm hoping that we stay in Adelaide for that entire period. I think last year, we made a big mistake when we played in Western Australia and then in the gather round. We probably should have gone to Adelaide after that rather than go home.
And they said as much, but...
Yeah, so I would hope that we go up to Adelaide and do a little hub for a week or whatever, get a bit of team bonding. It's early in the year. I would like to see us do that, and I hope we do just that, because that'll set us up good, because that's a tough game to have to play Adelaide in the gather round as well. I'm just thinking if there's anything else in terms of the fixture. We play West Coast at the G for like the first time in a long time. I remember taking my daughter, who's just turned 15, there for her first game of footy ever, and that was the last time we played the Eagles at the G, and she was like 3 or 4 or something at the time. And I remember her asking me, and we were pretty crap then, and she asked me, we kicked 4 goals for the day. She asked me if they take turns of kicking goals, and I said, I wish, because they absolutely trounced us that day. But that's how long it's been. So it's been a long time between drinks. Let's talk AFLW. And after finishing the season in second place on 8 wins and 2 losses, our AFLW's final series mirrored that of our men's as they were bundled out in straight sets, dashing the dream of going back-to-back. The D's were held to only one goal against the Kangaroos in the qualifying final as we were thrashed by 41 points. In the semi-final, it was a case of too little too late as they clawed back a 5-goal three-quarter time deficit against the Cats to lose by 5 points. George, what was your overall assessment of the finals? And, we had a pretty big drop-off from the season proper to the finals in terms of our output.
Very disappointing. I think we got found out in a big way in the finals. We were getting premonitions of it in the lead up to the finals, the way that North Melbourne and Brisbane played against us. I think we might have missed the boat. AFLW has progressed really quickly, and it's become so much like the men's game. It's now about contest and territory. And for most of the season, we were about the old style of play, outside run. Looks fantastic, great for the fans to watch. You're winning games by big margins, except when you get to finals, as Goody has said. Finals are a different sort of game. It's all about contest, and the tackling that was first shown by North Melbourne in the regular season, that Brisbane then picked up and then was replicated in the final series, is something we couldn't handle. We simply couldn't get the ball out. I couldn't understand why Eliza West wasn't playing in one of those finals. She's one of our inside grunt players.
It was the North Melbourne game. I couldn't believe it either.
Yeah. And then she comes back in the next game and is our highest possession getter. That was really telling. I think we've missed the boat. Even to put it all together with the trade period as well, we've lost some senior players who are strong, at least mature. There's been no indication that we're going to get anybody to replace them of an equivalent. We've got 2 more days in the trade period, but you can't be replacing with 17-year-old girls coming up against the likes of what Brisbane and Adelaide and North Melbourne have got in the midfield at the moment. Just looking back at the stats, the other thing that's not going to work in our favour is the AFL have handed both Brisbane and Adelaide a huge advantage, and repeated it again this year. Of the 7 grand finals that have been played in the AFLW, Brisbane or Adelaide have played in every single one of them, simply because they're up to this year or recently, they've been the state representative side. If you came from Queensland, or if you came from South Australia, you played for Brisbane or Adelaide, and they've essentially retained all those players, particularly Adelaide. Adelaide had 5 All-Australian players in their side for this year, and that didn't include Anne Hatchard, who was their top best and fairest scorer in the AFLW. So that gives you an indication that I don't think they gave Anne Hatchard a spot, because that would have been 6 Adelaide players in the All-Australian side. Brisbane had 3 as well, so 9 out of the All-Australian side were again from those sides. When you go to the draft this year, they've introduced the state-only picks again. So if you come from South Australia or Queensland, you can nominate for that state alone, so that you don't have to move anywhere else. And if you're a girl in either of those states, why would you do anything otherwise? You don't nominate for the national draft unless you're well down the ranks, or you've got a chance of being picked up by another side. If you're any good, you'll be nominating to stay in your own state. So access to those players from South Australia and Queensland will be limited. I think we've been found out. We had our opportunity. I can't see us improving anything. We'll still look fantastic, still win lots of games, because there is a big difference between the top teams and the bottom part of the teams. But until we get the really solid, hard players that you see in the North Melbourne sides, in the Adelaide side, and particularly in the midfield, we're depending totally on 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝗀 and 𝗪cie. That's 2 players. We've now lost West.
Yeah.
who's the next one we throw into the middle? You're depending on 𝗍𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 coming in. She's 35, great. She's still fantastic and thoroughly deserving of her spot. But when you look at the depth that Adelaide have got and the depth that even North Melbourne have got in the midfield, we're really lacking, and I don't think we'll compete successfully with those sides next year either.
I went to both finals, and particularly the Roos game. They physically smashed us. They just smashed us, and that 41 points was not, flattering. It was they deserved to win by that.
Yep.
I mean, I don't think we scored. Did we score one goal in the first?
One
half?
goal, yeah.
They smashed us off the park, and Geelong not quite as much physically smashed us, but they outmarked us. And Gillard had a really poor match, and they were just marking everything down forward. It's really interesting what you're saying. What you said, George, about the game is I was thinking about it. It's actually, I reckon they've got a problem for the AFLW in terms of the game itself, because it's been in an elite environment with elite coaching and elite defensive, and the finals became who was strongest. The grand final, I watched the grand final, and it was a knockdown, drag-out, physical game.
There were nearly 190 tackles in the grand final game.
In 8 20-minute quarters or whatever, so they're not full-length quarters. And the problem they're going to have is you've still got the skill issue there. And so you've got all of these super strong women who are unbelievably good tackles and who are crunching in all get out. And physical strength is really important. And it's a bit like where footy, it's a good the comparison to the men's game, but men have been playing in that style of footy has been in place for a while, and you can see already players are getting better at quick handballs out of space or kicks but that sort of defensiveness and strength at the contest. Well, the grand final was a pretty poor. I enjoyed the game, but it was really just like it was an arm wrestle, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't about skills. It was just about power and strength.
Territory and strength and get it out. And to be honest, when the Cracks were whipping against North, they smashed us physically off the park. It wasn't a skill thing. It was a physical at the contest and win the footy. And, for the first time, I thought, I thought we had skills with that. But having said that, I was shocked that 𝗍𝗍 didn't get a game in that Roos game. I couldn't believe it when she wasn't selected for that reason, because she's probably our top 3 extractor.
Yeah,
and now she's going.
Yep.
So that's the next thing. So we've had a few defections during the trade period. Defender Libby Birch is off to North, whilst midfielder Eliza West, as you mentioned, and half forward 𝗍𝗍𝗰𝗀𝗃 off to the Hawks. What do we need?
And Maddie Go's probably going to finish up at Essendon.
Yeah, that was touted earlier. I don't think that's happened yet.
Yeah. Well, we've got 2 more days to go.
Yeah. But we have had a few re-signings with Tanks, Hoare, Pearce, Paxi, a couple of others.
But the trouble is, who's going to replace those, like I said, mature, strong bodies that we're losing?
So what do we need?
I have to say, Bertie got a bit of a bath in that Cats game, and also in the we struggled down back. I forget the Cats forward. She was fantastic, brilliant mark, and they were just outmarked us in that game. It was, and Birch looks a bit slow now, so she'll be a huge loss. But who's going to replace her?
Yeah, exactly. She played full back because we lost Colvin and we lost Chaplin.
Yeah.
During the year with injury, and Birch Birch also had an early calf injury in the first couple of rounds. When she came back, she looks like she's still got the calf injury, but we had no one else.
She's scrapping, and the other big factor I have to say is that if there was as much focus in women's footy as there is on the men's game, there'd be big question marks over Taylor Harris, because she had a very, very average,
and she was obviously injured.
Well, it doesn't help when she's boxing and getting her head split open.
Yeah, well, she never really. Yeah, that's exactly.
But she never played a decent game after that.
Yeah, agreed. Totally agree. Yeah. Well, when she was, I can't remember which game it was. It was in the finals. She passed the ball when she was kicking from 30 metres.
Yeah. That was in that. I think it was one of the finals, and I couldn't believe it. I was at the game behind her and thinking, "What are you doing? Go back and kick it."
Yeah.
So what do we need to do in 2024? And are we still in the premiership window? And it sounds like we're not.
I don't think we're even close. I don't think we're going to. we're going to have to get strong bodies in the next 2 days, and there hasn't been any movement in that area because you're only going to pick 17-year-old girls.
It's really interesting what you're saying. I haven't watched any of, except for highlights of the women's rugby, which is sort of equivalent really of AFLW in terms of their resourcing and their infrastructure, and they are ferocious as well. But rugby's more set up for ferociousness. But you're spot on, George. It's at that level, those top 4 teams, not the other teams, but they're just like it. It's so much about the tackling. The tackling numbers in that grand final were just berserk.
Yeah, and the other thing is the body shapes have changed dramatically in the last 2 years, and the tall, thin, ex-basketballers, ex-volleyballers, and things like that. They're not the AFL players who make the difference now. It's all the
player like Hanks. And,
yep.
Right. Anything else to add on the AFLW front? I will add that Libby Birch, we're going to have to replace Compare to the pre-games. So she's lost that job.
You're available, aren't you, Eddie?
And, well, I mean, we should say congratulations to Daisy for being the coach of the Eagles side. When I first read it, I thought she's replacing Simpson.
Well, she might be.
She might be.
Well, I think we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back next season at some point, either before or after our first practice matches for our annual season preview show. I want to thank my co-hosts, George and Binman, for all their hard work throughout the year. Unlike me, these guys don't get paid to do this podcast. Well, actually, I don't get paid either, but seriously, they give up a couple of hours or more each week, win, lose or draw, to impart their wisdom. And without them, there would be no podcast. It'd just be me reading out some listener questions. So thank you, George and Binman. Thank you also to you, our loyal listeners. Without you, we're just 3 blokes talking into a microphone. So thank you for listening. Thank you to all the listeners that have posted questions, comments and reviews. The questions do form a huge part of the show, so we really appreciate people taking the time out to post them, and the reviews certainly do help to boost the podcast so we ultimately get more listeners. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers this week. Thank you to 𝗟𝗲𝗀𝗀, Romy Lip, 𝗠𝗲𝗀𝗀𝘁𝗍 Thank you to our caller, Terence, all the way from Belgium. Thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments this week. Thank you to Pipe Fitter, Bigfoot, Buck-Naked, Scroll, Red Jacket, Royal Demon, Lefty, D-Minion, Singer, Nudge, Delightful Play, Monocular and Smurf. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts from, and we'll read it out next year on the show. Well, see you next year. Go Demons.
Red Leggers.
Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons.